The Georgia dawn came hard and white, bleeding through the pine trees that lined the 1,000-yard range at Fort Benning. Colonel James Reeves stood alone in that pale light, his breath misting in the October cold, his hand steady as stone as he placed a single brass cartridge on a small wooden marker driven into the red clay earth. The marker bore a name burned into its surface with careful precision. Staff Sergeant David Chen, killed in action. March 15, 2002. Kosovo. 22 years of sunrises. 22 years of this same ritual. 22 years of whispered apologies to a ghost who never answered back. Reeves was 58 years old. 6 feet of weathered sinew and old scars. Gray threading through hair he kept military short. Eyes the color of flint that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. 3 silver stars hung in a shadow box in his quarters. A Navy Cross he never wore. 34 years of service that had cost him a marriage, a daughter who would not return his calls, and a debt he could never repay to a man who had trusted him completely. The wind shifted through the pines, carrying with it the smell of cordite and morning dew. Somewhere behind him, the base was waking, diesel engines coughing to life, boots on pavement, the metallic song of a flagpole chain rattling against aluminum. But here, on this range where he had trained hundreds of soldiers to kill from distances most men could not imagine, there was only silence and the weight of memory. Kosovo. The word sat in his mouth like broken glass. It had been a night mission, February cold and mountain dark. Reeves and Chen positioned on a ridge overlooking a compound where intelligence said 3 American contractors were being held. Serbian militia, 30 armed men, 2 snipers with the best training the United States Army could provide, and orders that were clear as scripture. Observe, confirm, eliminate the guards, extract the hostages. Chen had been his spotter for 6 years by then. The best Reeves had ever worked with. A man who could read wind like some men read books, who knew the ballistics of every round they carried, who never flinched when the moment came to pull a trigger. Chen had a wife back in California, a baby daughter 2 months old, Sarah. He carried a photograph in his vest pocket, laminated against the weather, and sometimes at night in their hide sites he would take it out and stare at it with an expression Reeves could never quite name. The decision had come down to seconds. 3 hostages visible through thermal imaging, guards rotating every 15 minutes. A window of opportunity so narrow it might never open again. Reeves had done the mathematics in his head. Wind speed, distance, trajectory, the probability of success versus the cost of hesitation. He had made the call. Chen had confirmed the range, 1,100 meters. Reeves had controlled his breathing, found that space between heartbeats where the whole world goes still, and squeezed the trigger twice. 2 guards down before their bodies hit the ground. The compound had erupted into chaos. The hostages had run. American forces had swept in from the valley below. Mission success. But wars are fought in the spaces between victories, and the bills always come due. 2 minutes after the extraction began, mortar fire had rained down on their position with the kind of precision that spoke of inside knowledge. Someone had known exactly where they were. Someone had called in coordinates while Reeves and Chen were focused on the target below. The barrage had been brief and surgical. Chen had taken shrapnel to the chest and neck. Reeves had dragged him 200 meters down the mountain, both of them painting the snow red. Chen's blood hot against Reeves's hands, his breathing wet and wrong. Chen had died looking up at stars he could not see, his fingers wrapped around that laminated photograph. His last words, a benediction Reeves did not deserve. "You made the right call, Shep. Don't you ever doubt it." But Reeves had doubted it every day since, every sunrise, every name added to the long roll of the dead, every student he trained who shipped out and came home in a flag-draped box. The mathematics of war allowed for acceptable losses. The mathematics of friendship did not. A voice cut through the morning stillness. 22 years, Jimmy. When you gonna forgive yourself?" Reeves did not turn. He knew the footsteps. Command Sergeant Major Marcus Tillman, 62 years old and built like an oak stump, gray beard trimmed to regulations, hands that had once been surgeon steady, now touched with the faint tremor of Parkinson's disease. Doc Tillman, 15 years as a SEAL medic before cross-training to special operations. Reeves's spotter after Chen died. The only man alive who knew the full weight of what Kosovo had cost. Doc held 2 paper cups of coffee, steam rising in the cold air. He handed one to Reeves without ceremony. "Never," Reeves said quietly. Doc stood beside him, both men staring downrange at targets that had not moved in hours. The silence between them was the kind that old soldiers share. The silence of men who have counted each other's heartbeats in the dark and know the exact measure of each other's ghosts. "You seen the new roster?" Doc asked after a time. Reeves sipped his coffee. Bitter and strong, the way he had drunk it in 100 forward operating bases scattered across a dozen wars. "Not yet. Why?" "Chen's daughter enrolled, Sarah Chen, communications specialist, wants to cross-train sniper." The coffee turned to ash in Reeves's mouth. He set the cup down on the wooden marker with care, his hands betraying nothing of the earthquake moving through his chest. Behind them, the sun cleared the tree line and the range blazed into color. Red clay, green pines, the white faces of distant targets waiting for bullets that would find them eventually, as bullets always did. "When?" Reeves asked. "She reports today. SOTIC Class 347. 16 students, 9 weeks. You know the numbers." Reeves knew the numbers. Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, the Army's premier sniper school, 65% attrition rate. Only the hardest, smartest, most disciplined soldiers made it through. And now David Chen's daughter, a woman who had been 2 months old when her father died bleeding in the snow, was about to walk into the crucible that Reeves had commanded for the last 8 years. "Does she know?" Reeves asked. "About me?" Doc shook his head. "Know what? That you were her father's team leader? That you made the call that put him in the scope of whoever dropped those mortars? That you carried him down a mountain while he died?" "No, Jimmy, she don't know any of that. Far as I can tell, she just knows her daddy was a soldier who never came home. Same story as 10,000 other kids." Reeves closed his eyes. The wind picked up, colder now, carrying voices from the barracks behind them. Young voices, confident and scared in equal measure. The voices of men and women who did not yet understand that war was not about bravery or honor or any of the words carved on monuments. War was about making impossible choices in the dark and living with them in the light. "I can't train her," Reeves said. Doc's expression did not change. "Why not?" "Because every time I look at her, I'll see him. Because I owe her a father. And all I can give her is the same training that got him killed. Because if something happens to her..." Doc let him trail off. Then he spoke with the blunt practicality of a man who had stitched too many wounds to believe in gentle truths. "Something already happened to her, Jimmy. She lost her father before she could remember his face. Now she's here trying to understand what he died for. You gonna deny her that because you can't forgive yourself? That ain't protecting her. That's protecting you." The words hit like bullets. Reeves opened his eyes and stared at the wooden marker, at the brass cartridge gleaming in the new light, at the name burned into wood. David Chen, brother, friend, the best spotter he had ever known. A man who had died trusting Reeves to make the right call. "What if I can't keep her safe?" Doc's smile was sad and knowing. "Jimmy, you've been a sniper for 30 years. You know better than anyone that safe is a lie we tell to sleep at night. You can't keep her safe, but you can train her right. Train her the way David would have wanted. Teach her to be a shepherd, not a wolf. And when she ships out, you can trust that you gave her every tool to come home alive." Reeves picked up his coffee cup. The liquid inside had gone cold, but he drank it anyway. Penance tasted like a lot of things. This morning it tasted like bitter grounds and regret. "When does she report?" 0530, briefing room, same as always. Reeves nodded. He bent and retrieved the brass cartridge from the marker, rolling it between his fingers. The ritual was complete. Another sunrise witnessed. Another apology offered to the dead. Tomorrow he would do it again. Doc turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, you remember Phil Carson?" Major Philip Carson, senior instructor, 20 years at Fort Benning, a competent teacher with a service record that read like a highlight reel. Kosovo veteran, 2 Bronze Stars. Reeves had served with him, trusted him, called him friend. "What about him?" "He volunteered to be your assistant instructor this cycle. Said he wanted to help with your last class." "My last class?" Doc met his eyes. "Come on, Jimmy, you're 6 months from mandatory retirement. The new colonel, Hartwick, she's been making noise about modernizing the program. VR simulations, data analytics, the kind of stuff that don't need old war horses like us. This might be the last time you run a course your way. Carson knows it, probably wants to pay respects. Or Carson knew Sarah Chen was enrolled and wanted to be close when the pass came knocking. Reeves dismissed the thought as paranoid. Carson was a good soldier, a good man. Kosovo had been chaos and fog and the friction of war. Mortar attacks happened. Positions got compromised. These things were not mysteries. They were simply the cost of fighting in a world where the enemy adapted and luck ran out. "Tell him I appreciate it," Reeves said. Doc nodded and walked away, his steps measured and careful, his hands held close to his sides to hide the tremor. Reeves watched him go, this friend who was dying by degrees, this man who had pulled him out of dark places more times than either of them could count. Then Reeves turned back to the range and the targets waiting in the distance. He had 5 hours before the briefing, 5 hours to prepare himself to meet David Chen's daughter, and pretend that he was not responsible for every tear she had ever cried. He spent those hours the way he always did, by shooting. The classroom smelled of floor wax and old coffee. 16 students sat in rows of metal chairs, their uniforms starched and pressed, their faces carrying that particular mixture of fear and eagerness that Reeves had learned to read like a second language. Rangers, SEALs, Delta operators, a handful of Army infantry with records that marked them as exceptional, and one woman in the second row, small-boned and dark-haired, with eyes the exact color and shape of David Chen's eyes. Reeves forced himself not to stare. He stood at the front of the room beside a podium he never used. Major Carson stood off to the side, arms crossed, face neutral. The clock on the wall read 05:30 exactly. Reeves began without preamble. "I am Colonel James Reeves. For the next 9 weeks, I will be your chief instructor for Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, Class 347. By the end of this course, 65% of you will have quit or failed. The remaining 35% will earn the designation of Special Operations Sniper and join a brotherhood that traces its lineage back to men who fought at Saratoga and Belleau Wood and Hugh City. Those men were shepherds. They killed not because they wanted to, but because killing one prevented the deaths of many. That is what you are here to become. Not wolves who hunt for pleasure, but shepherds who protect the flock even when the flock does not know it needs protecting." He paused, scanning their faces. Young faces, hard faces, faces that had seen combat and faces that had only imagined it. "This course will break you. It will break you physically with ruck marches and stalking exercises that will leave you bleeding from places you did not know could bleed. It will break you mentally with mathematics and meteorology and ballistics calculations that will make your head feel like it's splitting open. And it will break you spiritually because the moment you take your first human life through a scope, something inside you will change forever, and there is no changing it back. Some of you will discover you do not have what it takes. That is not a judgment on your courage or your character. It is simply a recognition of your limits. There is no shame in recognizing limits. There is only shame in pretending they do not exist." He let that settle. Then he pointed to the window where dawnlight was painting the ranges in shades of gold and shadow. "Out there, you will learn to shoot at distances most people cannot imagine. 1,000 meters, 1,500, 2,000 in the right conditions. You will learn to read wind and humidity and barometric pressure. You will learn to calculate for Coriolis effect and spin drift and the curvature of the Earth itself. You will learn to slow your heartbeat and control your breathing and find that space between seconds where the whole world stops and there is only you and the target and the shot that must be made. But before any of that, you will learn the single most important lesson of this course." He stepped forward, his voice dropping to something quieter and infinitely harder. "You will learn that every shot you take carries a weight. The weight of the life you end, the weight of the lives you save, the weight of the choice you make in that frozen moment when your finger rests on a trigger, and the mathematics of war become the reality of death. You will carry that weight for the rest of your life. It will wake you at 3 in the morning. It will sit beside you at your children's birthday parties. It will follow you into old age and whisper in your ear when you are alone. And you will never, ever be free of it." Silence filled the room like water. "If you cannot accept that weight, leave now. There is no dishonor in it. But if you stay, understand that I will demand everything you have and some things you did not know you possessed. I will push you past your limits and then push you further. I will watch you fail, and I will not help you up until you have learned to help yourself. And when you graduate, if you graduate, you will know that you have earned the right to call yourself a shepherd." He stopped. Let the weight of the words settle into their bones. Then a voice spoke from the second row, clear and steady and absolutely fearless. "Sir, what's the difference between a shepherd and a wolf when they both pull triggers?" Every eye in the room turned to Sarah Chen. Reeves looked at her and saw David Chen staring back. The same eyes, the same tilt of the head, the same absolute certainty that questions deserved answers, even when the questions cut close to bone. He could have deflected, could have told her to save questions for after the briefing, could have used his rank and his reputation to shut down the challenge before it took root. But that was not how David Chen had taught him to lead. David Chen had believed that good questions deserved good answers, and that leadership was earned through truth, not authority. So Reeves told her the truth. A wolf kills to feed himself, a shepherd kills to protect the flock. And the shepherd carries every shot for the rest of his life because he understands the cost of what he has done. You will understand that difference, Chen, when you take your first life. When you see a human being in your crosshairs and know that in 2 seconds they will cease to exist because you decided it was necessary. When you squeeze that trigger and watch them fall and realize that they had a name and a family and dreams they will never fulfill, that is when you will know whether you are a shepherd or a wolf. And God help you if you discover you are the latter. Sarah Chen did not look away, did not flinch. She simply nodded once, sharp and clean, and said, "Understood, sir." The briefing continued. Logistics, equipment issue, training schedule, range safety protocols. The usual litany of information that turned young soldiers into instruments of precision violence. But Reeves barely heard his own words. His mind was locked on the woman in the second row, who had her father's eyes and her father's courage, and who had just walked into a story that had begun 22 years ago in the mountains of Kosovo. When the briefing ended, he dismissed the class. Told them to draw gear and report to the barracks. Told them to get their affairs in order because for the next 9 weeks, their lives would belong to him and the course and nothing else. As they filed out, Reeves called after one of them, "Chen, stay behind." She approached the podium while the others left. Up close, the resemblance to David Chen was even stronger. Same height, same build, same way of standing with weight balanced and ready, like a fighter who knew how to move when movement mattered. "Your father," Reeves said quietly. "David Chen. I knew him." Her eyes widened, just slightly, just enough to show that the name still carried weight after all these years. "You did? How?" "We served together, Kosovo. He was the best spotter I ever had." Something shifted in her expression, pain and pride mixing into something complicated and old. "Then you know he died there, doing his job." The words hit like shrapnel. "Yes," Reeves said. "He died protecting others. It's what he was best at." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph, laminated against weather and time. She held it carefully, like it might crumble to dust if handled wrong. The image showed a young man in uniform holding an infant, his smile wide and genuine, his eyes bright with joy that had not yet learned about mortars and mountains and dying in the snow. "This is the only photo I have with him," Sarah said. "He shipped out when I was 2 months old. Never came back. I'm here because I need to understand what he saw through that scope. What made him choose this life over me?" The question was a knife. Reeves wanted to tell her that David Chen had not chosen war over family, that he had been a good man trapped in an impossible situation, that he had carried her photograph into combat and stared at it every night like it was a prayer, that his last words had been about the rightness of duty and the cost of honor. But all he said was, "He was a good soldier, a good man. You have every right to be proud of him." Sarah tucked the photograph away. When she looked up, her eyes were dry and hard. "I'm not here for pride, sir. I'm here to understand, and maybe to be worthy of what he left behind." Reeves felt something crack inside his chest, some old wound reopening, some scar tissue tearing free. "Then we better get you trained right," he said. She nodded and turned to leave, stopped at the door, looked back. "Thank you for telling me about him, sir. Nobody ever does." Then she was gone. Reeves stood alone in the empty classroom, surrounded by chairs that still held the warmth of bodies and air that still carried the scent of nervous sweat and new beginnings. He thought about David Chen bleeding out in the snow, about Sarah Chen walking into a crucible that might kill her or forge her into something harder than diamonds, about the mathematics of war and the weight of choices, and the debts that could never be repaid. A shepherd protects the flock, even when the flock does not know it needs protecting. Even when protecting them means carrying a weight that will break you from the inside out. That afternoon, Reeves returned to his office to find a piece of paper on his desk. No envelope, no signature, just a single line of text typed in courier font. Sarah Chen doesn't know what her father really died for. Neither does she know who really killed him. Kosovo wasn't what you think. Watch your back, shepherd, a friend who was there. Reeves read the note 3 times. Then he walked to his filing cabinet and pulled out a folder marked Kosovo 2002, Operation Summary Classified. He had not opened this file in 15 years, had not wanted to revisit the after-action reports and incident analyses and condolence letters he had written to David Chen's widow. But now he spread the papers across his desk and began to read. 5 people had been on that mission. Himself, David Chen, Doc Tillman, Major Philip Carson, and Lieutenant Williams, who had died of cancer in 2018. 5 people who knew the terrain and the mission parameters, and the exact coordinates of their hide site. Someone had radioed those coordinates to the enemy. Someone had called in mortar fire with surgical precision. Someone had wanted David Chen dead. And now, 22 years later, that someone had sent an anonymous note warning Reeves that the past was not as buried as he believed. Reeves pulled out his personal cell phone, called Doc Tillman. When the older man answered, Reeves did not waste time on pleasantries. "I need you to come to my office, now, and bring the Kosovo mission recordings if you still have them." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Doc said, "I was wondering when you'd ask for those." An hour later, Doc Tillman sat across from Reeves's desk. A small plastic case opened between them. Inside the case, wrapped in protective foam, was an old cassette tape, the kind used for mission documentation before everything went digital. The label read Kosovo OP, March 15, 2002, comms log. Doc's hands trembled as he lifted the tape out. "I've listened to this maybe 1,000 times over 22 years, Doc said quietly. "Every time hoping I heard it wrong, every time knowing I didn't. What's on it?" Reeves asked. "The truth about what happened that night. Or at least part of it." Doc pulled an old cassette player from his pocket. "Military issue. Obsolete but functional." He loaded the tape with careful precision, his Parkinson tremor making the simple task difficult. Then he pressed play. Static hissed through the small speaker. Then voices. Young voices from 22 years ago. Reeves and Chen coordinating target acquisition. Professional, calm. The voices of men who had done this 100 times and knew the dance by heart. Then, underneath the main transmission, something else. A third voice. Faint but present. Speaking on an open frequency that should have been clear. "Grid coordinates November Papa 5729. 2 shooters, high ground. 1,100 meters north-northwest of compound." Reeves felt his blood turn cold. That voice had just given away their exact position to anyone listening, had painted a target on their backs in the middle of a combat zone, had sentenced David Chen to death as surely as pulling a trigger. The tape continued. Chen's voice, urgent now. "Shepherd 1, did you copy that? Someone just transmitted our—" Then the explosion. The screaming. Reeves shouting Chen's name into a radio that would never answer again. Doc stopped the tape. The 2 men sat in silence. "That voice," Reeves said finally. "Do you know who it was?" Doc met his eyes, took a long breath. "It wasn't on our encrypted channel. Whoever keyed that transmission knew our position, knew our call signs, and knew how to broadcast on an open frequency that the enemy would be monitoring. It was deliberate, Jimmy. It was murder." "Who?" Doc's jaw tightened. "I've listened to this tape 1,000 times. I've compared it to every voice recording I have from that deployment. And I think it was Carson." The name hung in the air like smoke. Phil Carson. Friend. Fellow instructor. Kosovo veteran. The man who had volunteered to assist with this course. The man who had been there that night when David Chen died. "You're sure?" Reeves asked. Doc shook his head. 90% sure, but not certain enough to take to a court-martial. The audio quality is too poor. Could be Carson. Could be someone else. But Jimmy, there were only 5 of us close enough to know those coordinates in real time. You, me, Chen, Carson, and Williams. Williams is dead. You and I didn't do it. Chen sure as hell didn't betray himself. That leaves Carson." Reeves stood and walked to the window. Outside, students were running the obstacle course, young bodies pushing against gravity and exhaustion, and the limits of what flesh could endure. Sarah Chen was among them, her smaller frame compensating with technique what it lacked in raw power. She attacked each obstacle with focused intensity, never wasted movement, never quit. David Chen's daughter. And if Doc was right, then the man who had killed her father was standing 20 feet away every day, smiling and teaching and pretending that Kosovo had been nothing more than bad luck and the fog of war. Why? Reeves asked without turning from the window. Why would Carson do it? I don't know. Doc's voice was heavy. Maybe he was bought. Maybe he was blackmailed. Maybe he had his own reasons we'll never understand. But Jimmy, if he did betray us, if he did get Chen killed, then he's been living with that secret for 22 years. And now Sarah's here. If she starts asking questions, if she starts digging into her father's death, she becomes a loose end. Exactly. Reeves turned from the window. Have you told anyone else about this tape? No, I wasn't even sure I should tell you. But then Sarah enrolled, and then you got that note, and I realized that keeping silent wasn't protecting anyone anymore. It was just letting a killer hide. Reeves picked up the anonymous note from his desk. Read it again. Watch your back, Shepard, a friend who was there. Someone else knew. Someone else had been in Kosovo or had access to information about what really happened. Someone was warning him that danger was coming. Or someone was playing a deeper game. We need to be careful, Reeves said. If Carson did this, if he's been covering it up for 22 years, he won't hesitate to cover it up permanently. And if Sarah gets caught in the middle, he did not finish the sentence. Did not need to. Doc stood, his movements stiff with age and illness. What do you want to do? Reeves looked at the photograph on his desk. Him and David Chen in dress uniform after receiving their silver stars. Brothers in arms, friends who had trusted each other with their lives. One of them had lived. One of them had died. And the debt between them had never been settled. I'm going to train Sarah Chen the best I can, Reeves said quietly. I'm going to teach her everything her father knew and everything I've learned since. I'm going to make her into a shepherd who can protect herself and others. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to find out the truth about Kosovo. All of it. Who betrayed us, why they did it, and what they're planning to do now that Sarah's here. And if it was Carson, then I'll make sure he answers for it, one way or another. Doc nodded slowly. You know this could end your career, your reputation, everything you've built. Reeves looked back out the window at Sarah Chen completing the obstacle course, her face set with determination that he recognized because he had seen it in her father's face 1,000 times. Some debts are worth more than careers, Reeves said. That night, long after the students had been dismissed to their barracks and the ranges had gone quiet, Reeves returned to the 1,000-yard line. The moon was up, full and bright, painting the world in shades of silver and shadow. He carried his personal rifle, the same rifle he had used in Kosovo, a bolt-action Remington 700 chambered in .308, worn smooth from decades of use, the stock shaped perfectly to his shoulder. He sat up in the prone position, loaded a single round, found his breathing, let the world narrow down to crosshairs and wind in the white face of a target he could barely see in the darkness. One shot, one chance, one moment between decision and consequence. He thought about David Chen dying in the snow, about Sarah Chen running obstacles and asking questions, about Phil Carson smiling and teaching and carrying secrets that might be worth killing to protect, about the tape recording that proved someone had betrayed them, about the note warning him to watch his back. He thought about what it meant to be a shepherd in a world full of wolves. Then he exhaled half a breath, found that space between heartbeats where time stops and truth lives, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound rolled across the empty range and echoed off the tree line and faded into silence. Downrange, the target fell. Perfect center mass, perfect shot. The kind of shot that David Chen would have spotted for, and Doc Tillman would have confirmed, and Phil Carson would have witnessed and said nothing about afterward. Reeves worked the bolt, ejected the spent brass, let it fall into the red Georgia clay beside all the other brass that had fallen there over 30 years of teaching young soldiers how to kill at impossible distances. 6 months until mandatory retirement. 9 weeks until Sarah Chen either graduated or failed. 22 years since David Chen had died trusting him. And somewhere in the darkness between past and present and future, a truth waiting to be found. Reeves stood and shouldered his rifle, walked back toward the lights of the base. Behind him, The target lay fallen in the moonlight, a white shape against dark earth, silent testimony to the mathematics of war and the weight of choices and the debts that followed men through all the years of their lives. "A shepherd protects the flock," David Chen had said in those last bleeding moments. "Even when it costs everything," Reeves whispered into the night wind. "I'm still protecting them, brother. I'm still carrying the weight. And before this is over, I'm going to find out who took you from your daughter. I promise you that." The wind carried his words away across the ranges, where 1,000 ghosts walked and 1,000 debts waited to be paid. And in the barracks, Sarah Chen lay awake in the darkness, staring at the photograph of a father she had never known, wondering what he had seen through his scope that had made him choose duty over her, not knowing that the man who could answer that question was standing guard in the night, preparing for a war that had started 22 years ago and was only now coming home to finish what it had begun. Week 1 of SOTIC began the way all such weeks began, with pain and exhaustion and the systematic dismantling of everything the students thought they knew about themselves. The Georgia October turned cold and wet, rain hammering down in sheets that turned the red clay into soup and made every movement a battle against gravity and misery. 16 bodies pushed through ruck marches that started at 0400 and did not end until muscles screamed and lungs burned, and the only thing keeping feet moving forward was the certainty that stopping meant failing. Colonel James Reeves watched them all, but his eyes kept returning to Sarah Chen. She was the smallest student in the class by 40 pounds, gave up 6 inches of height to the shortest male operator. Every ruck march put her at a mechanical disadvantage that no amount of heart could fully compensate for, but she never quit, never complained. When the 80-pound pack threatened to drive her into the mud, she adjusted her stride and kept moving. When the hills grew steep enough to send grown men to their knees, she leaned forward and climbed. And when Captain Jake Brennan, the SEAL team leader with shoulders like bridge pilings and an ego to match, made comments about letting her use a lighter pack, she simply looked at him with an expression that mirrored her father's unshakable resolve and said nothing at all. Reeves understood that look, had seen variations of it on David Chen's face 1,000 times. The look of someone who had already decided that words were a waste of energy better spent on proving doubters wrong. The range work told a different story. Where Sarah struggled with physical endurance, she excelled with precision. Her first qualification shoot at 600 meters put 10 rounds into a group the size of a fist. Not the tightest group in the class, but consistent, predictable, the hallmark of a shooter who understood that speed meant nothing without accuracy. Major Phil Carson ran the range that day, his voice carrying across the wet grass as he called corrections and adjustments. Reeves stood 50 meters away, watching through binoculars, studying not just Sarah's technique but Carson's reactions to her, looking for something, anything, a tell that might confirm what the cassette tape suggested or prove Doc Tillman's suspicions wrong. But Carson was professional, courteous. He treated Sarah exactly the same as every other student, offered the same technical advice, made the same dry jokes, showed no sign whatsoever that her last name meant anything more than a roster entry, which proved nothing except that Phil Carson was either innocent or very, very good at hiding guilt. That evening, after the students had been dismissed to clean weapons and study ballistic tables, Reeves found himself in the instructor's office reviewing performance data. Carson sat across the desk, coffee cup in hand, going through scorecards with the methodical attention of a man who had done this for 20 years. "Chen's doing better than expected," Carson remarked without looking up. "Her fundamentals are solid, breathing discipline, trigger control, she's got the foundation." Her father was the same way, Reeves observed carefully. "Natural shooter, never forced it." Carson's pen stopped moving for just a fraction of a second, then continued as if nothing had happened. "I remember," Carson replied. "David Chen, hell of a spotter. Kosovo, right?" Reeves felt something cold move through his chest. The casualness of it. The way Carson could speak that name as if it were just another name in a long list of the dead. As if he had not been there when Chen bled out in the snow. As if 22 years had erased what had happened on that mountain. "That's right, you were there." Carson looked up then, met Reeves' eyes with an expression that gave away nothing. "We were all there, Jimmy. Doesn't mean I remember every detail. It was a long time ago, a lot of missions since then, a lot of names, but some names you don't forget, Reeves murmured. Carson held his gaze for a long moment, then returned to the scorecards. No, he agreed, some names you don't forget. The conversation ended there, but it left Reeves with more questions than answers. Was Carson's casualness a sign of innocence, or the calculated performance of a man who had spent 2 decades practicing his lies? Was the momentary pause with the pen a tell, or just the natural hesitation of someone trying to recall old memories? Reeves did not know, could not know, not yet. But he filed the interaction away in the growing catalog of small moments that might add up to a larger truth. Week 2 brought the stalking exercises. The art of moving through terrain without being seen, of reading ground and shadow and wind to become invisible in plain sight. Students were given 8 hours to cover 3 miles of forest, set up a hide site within 200 meters of an observation post manned by instructors, and take a single shot at a target without being detected. 60% of students failed on their first attempt. Sarah Chen was not among them. Reeves watched through the spotting scope from the observation post as she materialized from the tree line like smoke-given form. She had chosen an approach that most students avoided because it required moving uphill through dense undergrowth with no clear paths. But the difficulty of the terrain made it the last place instructors would expect contact. Smart, tactical, the kind of thinking that came from studying terrain as a language rather than an obstacle. She set up her hide site in a depression beneath a fallen pine, using natural materials to break up her silhouette, positioning herself so the afternoon sun would be at her back and in the eyes of anyone looking her direction. Then she went still, completely still, the kind of stillness that required absolute discipline, because the human body wants to move, to shift weight, to scratch an itch or adjust a cramping muscle. But movement meant detection, and detection meant failure. 2 hours she lay there, waiting, patient, while other students revealed themselves through careless motion or poorly chosen positions, while instructors scanned the forest with optics that could pick out a button at 400 meters, while the sun tracked across the sky and shadows shifted, and the October cold seeped into bones. Then, with no warning, she fired. The sound cracked across the valley, sharp and final. Downrange, the steel target rang like a bell and fell. Perfect center mass, perfect shot. The instructors swept the tree line with binoculars, trying to locate the shooter. Saw nothing. Sarah had chosen her position so well, camouflaged herself so thoroughly, that even knowing approximately where she had to be, they could not pick her out against the forest floor. Dr. Tillman, serving as primary observer, keyed his radio. "Shooter, identify yourself." Sarah's voice came back calm and professional. "Chen, Sergeant Sarah Chen, first shot, target down and proceeding to extract." And then she was gone, sliding backward out of her position, using the terrain to mask her withdrawal, leaving no trace except a few disturbed pine needles that would be invisible within the hour. Doc looked at Reeves and smiled with something that might have been pride. "David would have been proud of that," Doc said. Reeves nodded, could not speak past the tightness in his throat. That night, he found Sarah in the equipment shed, cleaning her rifle with the obsessive care of someone who understood that a weapon was more than metal and wood. It was a tool that kept you alive when everything else failed. She looked up when Reeves entered but did not stop working. "Good stock today," Reeves began. "Thank you, sir. Your hide site was well chosen. Approach was smart. Shot placement was perfect." Sarah ran a patch through the barrel, studying the cloth for residue before running another. "My father teach me that?" she asked. The question was casual, but Reeves heard the hunger beneath it. The need for connection to a man she had never known. The desire to understand where her skills came from, and whether they were inherited or earned. "He taught me," Reeves answered. "And I'm teaching you. So in a way, yes. You're learning what he knew." Sarah set down the cleaning rod and looked at him directly. Her gaze carried the same unwavering focus he remembered from her father, though the shape of her face and the set of her jaw were distinctly her own. "What was he like? As a person, I mean, not as a soldier." Reeves pulled up a stool and sat. Outside, rain had started again, drumming on the shed's metal roof with a sound like distant gunfire. "He was quiet," Reeves began, "not shy, just someone who believed in listening more than talking. He could read people the way he read wind, knew when someone was scared or angry or lying just by watching their eyes. Made him a hell of a spotter because he could predict what I was going to do before I did it. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Mom said he was like that at home too. Said he could tell when she'd had a bad day before she even spoke. Used to make her coffee exactly the way she needed it without asking. He loved her. Talked about her all the time. And you. Even though you were just a baby when he deployed, he carried your picture everywhere. Said looking at it reminded him why the work mattered. Why coming home mattered. Sarah's hand stilled on the rifle. But he didn't come home. No, Reeves admitted. He didn't. The rain intensified. Thunder rolled somewhere distant. Sarah resumed cleaning, her movements mechanical now, automatic. Do you ever think about it? She asked. The people you've killed through a scope? Every day. Does it get easier? No. It gets heavier. Every shot adds to what you carry until some mornings you're not sure you can stand up under all of it. But you do because that's what shepherds do. They bear the burden so others don't have to. Sarah nodded slowly. Set the rifle aside, now clean and ready. I understand why he chose it, she said. This life, this work. He wasn't choosing it over me. He was choosing it for me. For everyone. To be the kind of person who stands between the wolves and the flock. Reeves felt something break inside him. Some old dam finally giving way. He would be proud of you, so damn proud. Sarah stood, shouldered her rifle, looked at Reeves with determination that was entirely her own, though it echoed her father's commitment. Then I better make sure I don't let him down. After she left, Reeves sat alone in the equipment shed listening to rain and thunder and the ghosts of conversations he had shared with David Chen in a dozen forward operating bases scattered across a dozen wars. He thought about how Sarah had inherited her father's discipline and his absolute certainty that some things were worth dying for, even as she forged her own path forward. And he thought about how someone had murdered David Chen 22 years ago and might now be planning to murder his daughter. The thought made his hands shake with rage he could not afford to show. Week 3 brought the long-range shooting. Distances that pushed the limits of what the human eye could see and what ballistics could predict. 1,000 meters, 1,200, 1,500 in the right conditions. At those ranges, wind was not a factor, but an enemy. A single miles per hour miscalculation could send a round 3 feet off target. Temperature affected powder burn. Humidity changed air density. Even the rotation of the Earth itself had to be calculated into the mathematics of death. Captain Brennan excelled at this. He had the physical strength to hold a heavy rifle steady, and the mathematical mind to process complex variables quickly. His groups at 1,000 meters were tight and consistent, textbook perfect. But Sarah Chen was better, not because her groups were tighter. They were not. But because she understood something that Brennan had not yet learned, that precision shooting at extreme range was not about overpowering the variables, but dancing with them. That wind and distance and gravity were not obstacles to be conquered, but partners in an equation that had to balance perfectly or not at all. Reeves watched her shoot and recognized David Chen in every movement, the way she studied the mirage rising from hot earth, the way she wet her finger and held it up to feel the subtlest shift in wind direction, the way she waited, sometimes for minutes, until every variable aligned and the shot presented itself like a gift. Brennan shot faster, Sarah shot truer. On the final qualification day of week 3, with storm clouds building in the west and wind gusting unpredictably, Brennan challenged Sarah to a head-to-head competition. 10 rounds each at 1,200 meters. Best average group size wins. Reeves allowed it. Not because he approved of the testosterone-driven competition, but because combat did not care about training schedules or political correctness. Combat cared about who could make the shot when it mattered most. Brennan shot first. His rounds clustered in a group the size of a dinner plate, exceptional shooting by any standard. He stepped back from the rifle with the confidence of someone who knew he had just set a high bar. Sarah stepped to the line, checked her scope, studied the wind flag snapping in the gusting breeze, loaded a single round. Then she stopped, just stopped, waited while the wind shifted and gusted, and finally, for just a handful of seconds, calmed into something predictable. She fired. The round flew downrange through 1,200 meters of Georgia air, fighting wind and gravity and the friction of its own passage, and struck the target dead center. She loaded and fired 9 more rounds with the same patience, the same absolute refusal to rush, the same understanding that in precision shooting, time was not the enemy. Impatience was. When the targets were examined, Sarah's group measured 8 inches, half the size of Brennan's. Doc Tillman, serving as range safety officer, announced the results over the radio. The other students whistled and clapped. Brennan's face went red, but he had the grace to shake Sarah's hand. Later alone, he approached Reeves. "She's not faster than me," Brennan stated. "Not stronger. So why is she better?" Reeves considered the question, looked at this young SEAL who had all the tools and talent but had not yet learned the most important lesson. Because she understands that being a sniper is not about you. It's not about your strength or your speed or your ego. It's about the shot, the mission, the people you're protecting. When you can make it about that instead of about proving yourself, you'll shoot the way she does. Until then, you'll be fast and strong and second best. Brennan absorbed this, nodded slowly, walked away with the posture of someone who had just learned something valuable and painful in equal measure. That evening, Reeves met with Doc Tillman in the instructor's lounge. The room was empty, the base settling into the quiet that came with darkness and exhaustion. Doc poured 2 whiskeys from a bottle he kept hidden in his desk. Not technically allowed, but not technically forbidden either. One of the small rebellions that old soldiers permitted themselves. "I've been thinking about Kosovo," Doc ventured. Reeves accepted the glass, had been expecting this conversation. And I've been running the numbers in my head, trying to figure out why Carson would betray us. If he betrayed us. Because that's the thing, Jimmy. We don't know for sure. All we have is a bad recording and a gut feeling and 22 years of wondering. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we're wrong. Maybe it wasn't Carson. Maybe it was someone else we haven't considered. Or maybe it was just chaos. War, bad luck. Positions get compromised. People die. Doesn't always mean there's a conspiracy. Reeves swirled the whiskey in his glass. The amber liquid caught the light and threw shadows. "You don't believe that?" Doc sighed. "No, I don't. But I want to believe it. Because if Carson did betray us, if he got David killed and has been walking around free for 22 years teaching students and collecting a paycheck and sleeping soundly at night, then what does that say about us? About our ability to judge character? About the system that lets guilty men hide? It says the system is broken. It says we trusted the wrong person. And it says we have a chance now to make it right. By doing what? We can't prove anything with that tape. Can't take it to a court-martial or an inspector general. Best case, they call it inconclusive. Worst case, they bury it and us along with it. Reeves set down his glass. Then we don't go through official channels. We investigate quietly. We watch Carson. We look for mistakes. And when Sarah finishes this course, when she's safe and graduated and beyond his reach, then we bring the evidence to someone who can't ignore it. And if he makes a move before then, if he tries to hurt Sarah, then we stop him, Reeves stated flatly, whatever it takes. Doc studied him across the desk, the tremor in his hands more pronounced now, the Parkinson's advancing day by day, stealing precision and steadiness in time. "You know what you're risking? Your career, your pension, your reputation. Everything you've built over 30 years for a woman you barely know and a man who's been dead for 2 decades. Reeves met his eyes. Some debts are worth more than careers. The same words he had spoken days ago, but they carried more certainty now, more resolve. Because with each passing day, Sarah proved herself worthy of her father's legacy and Reeves's protection. Doc raised his glass. "To debts worth paying." They drank in silence. Outside, somewhere on the ranges, a coyote called into the night. The sound was lonely and wild, and somehow appropriate for 2 old warriors plotting justice in a world that had mostly forgotten what justice meant. The next morning brought a training incident that changed everything. Week 3 culminated in a live fire stalking exercise. Students would move through a designated area while instructors attempted to detect them using optics and observation. Any student who could reach a firing position undetected, take a shot at a target, and withdraw without being spotted would pass. Detection meant failure and recycling to the next class. Sarah drew one of the harder routes. Uphill approach, minimal cover, sun angle unfavorable. But she had proven herself capable of difficult tasks, and Reeves had no concerns about her ability to adapt. Phil Carson volunteered to serve as range safety officer. At the time, Reeves thought nothing of it. Carson often volunteered for range duties. It was part of his job as senior instructor, part of his routine. Nothing unusual. But 30 minutes into the exercise, as Sarah was moving through a section of pine forest 600 meters from the observation post, a shot rang out. Not from Sarah's position. From somewhere else. Somewhere wrong. The bullet struck a rock 8 inches from Sarah's head and ricocheted with a sound like a scream. She froze instantly, following protocol for safety violations. Ceased all movement. Waited for the all clear. Reeves was already moving before the echo faded. Running toward the sound. Shouting into his radio for a ceasefire, demanding to know what the hell had just happened. Carson's voice came back calm and professional. Accidental discharge from the adjacent range. Advanced students running drills. Wind drift pushed the round off course. No injuries, subject Chen is secure. Then, Reeves reached Sarah's position 90 seconds later, found her exactly where she had frozen, prone behind a boulder, face pale but composed, no visible injuries. "You okay?" he demanded. "Yes, sir, just startled." Reeves examined the impact point. The bullet had struck granite and fragmented. Pieces of copper jacket glittered in the stone. He ran the calculations in his head. Trajectory, wind speed, distance from the adjacent range where Carson claimed the shot originated. The numbers did not work. To drift that far, the bullet would have needed 40-mile-per-hour wind. Current conditions showed 8 miles per hour. Someone would have had to aim at Sarah's position and deliberately pull the trigger. Reeves looked at Carson, who stood 50 meters away supervising the range shutdown. Their eyes met across the distance. Carson's expression was professionally concerned, apologetic. But underneath it, Reeves thought he detected something else, something cold and calculating, the look of a man checking to see if his message had been received. The message was clear. Sarah Chen was not safe, and neither was anyone trying to protect her. That evening, Reeves broke protocol. He called Sarah to his office after hours. A private meeting that could be misinterpreted or questioned, but which he judged necessary. She arrived precisely on time. Knocked once, entered when told. Stood at attention, despite being told to relax. "The incident today?" Reeves began without preamble. "What did you make of it?" Sarah considered the question. Her training said it was an accident. Her instincts probably said otherwise. "Officially, sir, accidental discharge, wind drift, bad luck." "And unofficially?" Her expression hardened. "Unofficially, that bullet was aimed at me. Wind does not push rounds 40 meters off course in 8-mile-per-hour conditions. Someone shot at my position deliberately." Reeves nodded, glad she understood, glad she was not naive enough to believe comfortable lies. "If I told you I think you might be in danger," he continued carefully, "that someone might want you out of this course or worse, what would you do?" Sarah did not hesitate. "I would ask why, sir. And then I would ask what I could do to protect myself and complete my training. The why is complicated, connected to your father's death, to Kosovo, to things that happened 22 years ago that some people might prefer stayed buried. And you think I'm a threat to those secrets? I think you're David Chen's daughter. I think your presence here makes certain people nervous. And I think nervous people do dangerous things." Sarah absorbed this, processed it with the analytical mind that made her good at intelligence work. "Are you one of those people, sir? One of the ones who want secrets buried?" Reeves almost smiled. The directness of it, the absolute refusal to dance around hard questions. "Number. I'm one of those people trying to unbury them, even if it costs me everything." "Then I'll help." "You'll do no such thing. Your job is to finish this course, graduate, become the sniper your father would be proud of. My job is to keep you alive long enough to do that." Sarah leaned forward, intensity radiating off her like heat. "With respect, sir, if someone killed my father and has been hiding it for 22 years, then my job is to make sure they answer for it. Training is important, but justice is more important." Reeves saw David Chen in that moment, saw the same absolute conviction that some principles mattered more than personal safety, the same willingness to stand in harm's way for something larger than self-interest. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Your father said something similar once, right before he died. Then maybe I'm more his daughter than I knew." The conversation ended there, but it marked a shift. An unspoken alliance between an old colonel carrying 22 years of guilt and a young sergeant carrying a lifetime of questions about a father she had never known. They were in this together now, whatever this was, whatever it cost. Late that night, long after Sarah had returned to the barracks and the base had gone quiet, Reeves received a phone call on his personal cell. Unknown number. He almost did not answer, but something made him pick up. A voice he did not recognize said 3 sentences. "The tape is not the only evidence. There are mission files Carson altered, and he's planning another accident for week 5, live fire exercise, multiple casualties. He intends to eliminate both you and the girl. Then the line went dead. Reeves sat in the darkness of his quarters, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to dead air and the sound of his own heart hammering against his ribs. Someone was helping them. Someone who knew about Kosovo. Someone who had access to classified files and inside knowledge of Carson's plans. But who? And why now after 22 years of silence? Reeves did not know. But he knew this. Week 5 was 6 days away. 6 days to prepare. 6 days to find proof. 6 days to stop a killer who had already murdered once and was preparing to murder again. He picked up his phone and called Doc Tillman. When the old medic answered, voice rough with sleep, Reeves said only 4 words. "It's time to move." The next morning came cold and sharp, frost glittering on the grass like broken glass. Colonel James Reeves stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside Doc Tillman's quarters, breath misting in the October air, waiting for his oldest friend to answer the door. When Doc finally appeared, eyes heavy with interrupted sleep, Reeves pushed past him into the small living room and closed the door behind them. "We have 6 days," Reeves stated without preamble. 6 days before Carson makes his move. We need to find proof, real proof, something that will stand up to scrutiny and cannot be buried or explained away. Doc moved to his coffee maker, movements stiff with age and the tremor that never fully left his hands anymore. The Parkinson's was advancing faster than either of them wanted to acknowledge. Soon, Doc would not be able to hold a rifle steady. Soon after that, he would not be able to hold a coffee cup. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, they had other wars to fight. "The anonymous caller," Doc said as he measured grounds with shaking fingers. "You believe him?" "I believe someone knows more than they're saying. Someone with access to classified files and inside knowledge of Carson's plans. Could be someone in intel. Could be someone from the Kosovo operation we've forgotten about. Could be Carson's accomplice getting cold feet after 22 years. Or it could be Carson himself," Doc offered, "setting a trap, feeding us just enough truth to make us move carelessly." Reeves had considered this, had spent the night turning possibilities over in his mind like river stones, looking for sharp edges that might cut through to truth. If it's a trap, we walk into it with our eyes open. If it's real help, we use it. Either way, we move forward, because standing still means Sarah dies and Carson walks free for another 22 years. Doc poured 2 cups of coffee, black for both of them. No sugar or cream to soften the bitterness. They had been drinking it this way since Kosovo, since the night David Chen died and everything sweet had turned to ash. "What do you need from me?" "Access to the archive. Everything from Kosovo 2002. Mission files, after-action reports, communications logs, personnel records, anything that might show what Carson altered or what he's trying to hide. That's going to raise flags. Those files are sealed, need special authorization even to request them. Then we don't request them. We go in after hours. When the archivists are gone and the security is minimal, we pull what we need and we get out before anyone notices." Doc stared at him over the rim of his coffee cup. "Jimmy, that's not bending the rules. That's breaking them. Career ending if we're caught." "I know. And you're willing to risk it? Everything you've built? 30 years of service for files that might not even exist?" Reeves set down his cup, looked his friend in the eyes. "David Chen died thinking I made the right call. Died trusting me to protect the people who came after him. If I can't protect his daughter now, if I let Carson kill her to cover up a murder I should have solved 22 years ago, then everything I've built is worth nothing anyway." Doc absorbed this, nodded slowly. The tremor in his hand stilled for just a moment as old certainty replaced new weakness. "Tonight then, 0200. Archives are empty. Security makes rounds every 90 minutes. We'll have maybe an hour before someone notices we're where we shouldn't be. 1 hour to find truth that had been buried for 2 decades. 1 hour to save a life that had not yet been lived but was already marked for ending. 1 hour to prove that shepherds protected the flock even when the wolves wore friendly faces." They finished their coffee in silence. Outside, the base began to wake. Boots on pavement, engines coughing to life. The mechanical rhythm of an institution that had outlived the men who built it, and would outlive the men trying to save it. Week 4 began with advanced fieldcraft. The students were taken into the Chattahoochee National Forest, given minimal supplies, and told to survive for 72 hours while evading a hunter force of instructors equipped with thermal optics and tracking dogs. It was designed to break the weak and forge the strong, to separate those who could endure genuine hardship from those who merely thought they could. Sarah Chen disappeared into the forest like smoke. For 3 days, the instructors could not find her. The dogs picked up her scent twice, but lost it both times in creek beds where she had walked upstream for half a mile before exiting on stone that held no tracks. The thermal imaging caught glimpses that might have been her, or might have been deer moving through underbrush. She ate what she could forage, slept in burrows she dug into hillsides, moved only in rain, when her noise was masked by weather. On the 3rd day, she appeared at the extraction point exactly on time, 20 pounds lighter and carrying the kind of exhaustion that came from pushing the body past its design limits. But she had made it, had proven that small did not mean weak, and that determination could compensate for disadvantages in size and strength. Captain Brennan, the SEAL who had challenged her weeks earlier, extended his hand when she emerged from the tree line. "You're tougher than you look," he acknowledged. Sarah shook his hand with fingers that were blistered and bleeding. "Tough is just stubbornness with better marketing," she replied. Brennan laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from recognition and respect. From that moment, the dynamic in the class shifted. Sarah was no longer the outsider, no longer the woman who had to prove herself worthy of being there. She was simply another operator, another student grinding through the crucible. Her gender became irrelevant in the face of demonstrated competence. But Phil Carson watched all of this with eyes that gave nothing away. He congratulated Sarah on her performance, offered tactical critiques that were professional and useful, showed no sign that her success bothered him, or that he saw her as anything other than a student progressing through a course. But Reeves knew better, knew that predators were most dangerous when they appeared most calm, that Carson's professionalism was a mask worn over calculations about how and when to strike. Week 5 was 4 days away. 4 days until the live fire exercise. 4 days until Carson made his move. That night at 0200 hours, Reeves and Doc Tillman entered the base archives through a side entrance that Doc had accessed 1,000 times during his years managing training documentation. The lock was old and simple. Doc had it open in 15 seconds. Inside, the archives smelled of paper and dust and time. Row upon row of filing cabinets and storage boxes containing the documented history of every course and every mission, and every soldier who had passed through Fort Benning's gates over 70 years. Somewhere in this maze of bureaucracy and record-keeping was the truth about Kosovo, the proof they needed, the evidence that would either save Sarah Chen or prove that Reeves had been chasing ghosts. They split up. Doc took the personnel files. Reeves took the mission reports. They worked in silence, using small LED flashlights to navigate between shelves, pulling files and scanning pages for anything that looked altered or suspicious. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. Security would make their rounds soon. Reeves was beginning to think they would find nothing, that Carson had been too careful, that whatever evidence existed had been destroyed long ago. Then Doc's voice cut through the darkness. "Jimmy, you need to see this." Reeves moved between the shelves to where Doc stood holding a personnel file, his flashlight illuminating a page that had been poorly altered. Someone had used correction fluid to white out a section of text and then typed over it, the kind of amateur forgery that would pass casual inspection, but fell apart under scrutiny. The file belonged to Lieutenant Marcus Williams, the 5th member of the Kosovo team, the man who had died of cancer in 2018. "What am I looking at?" Doc pointed to the altered section. Medical records. Williams had a routine physical in January 2002, 2 months before Kosovo. The original diagnosis said borderline hypertension, cleared for duty. But someone whited that out and changed it to severe anxiety disorder, recommended for psychiatric evaluation. Why would someone change a medical diagnosis retroactively? Doc's face was grim in the flashlight's glow. Because if Williams was mentally unstable, then anything he might have said about Kosovo could be dismissed as unreliable. If he ever tried to report what really happened, command could point to this file and say he was crazy, suffering from combat stress, seeing conspiracies that didn't exist. Reeves felt ice in his veins. "You think Williams knew something?" "I think Williams knew everything." And I think Carson altered this file to make sure nobody would believe him if he talked. Did he? Talk, I mean. Doc pulled another page from the file. An incident report dated October 2002, 7 months after Kosovo. Williams had been found in his quarters, drunk and incoherent, rambling about betrayal and murder and coordinates radioed to the enemy. The report was filed by his commanding officer and recommended immediate psychiatric intervention. Williams spent 6 months in counseling and was then quietly transferred to a non-combat role, where he finished his career in obscurity. He tried to tell them, tried to report what Carson did, and they buried him with paperwork and diagnoses and transfers. Doc nodded. The tremor in his hands worse now, fatigue and stress making the Parkinson's more pronounced. There's more. He pulled out a final page, a letter written in shaky handwriting on yellowed paper. Not an official document, just a personal note tucked into the file where it should not have been. The letter was addressed to Reeves, dated 3 weeks before Williams died. Colonel Reeves, if you're reading this, then I'm dead. And someone finally had the sense to look where I told them to look. I tried to report what happened in Kosovo, but nobody would listen. They said I was sick, said the war had broken something in my head. Maybe it did, but I know what I saw. Carson radioed our coordinates to the enemy. I was 30 meters away when he did it, heard every word. He used an open frequency and coded it to sound like routine traffic, but I knew. I knew what he was doing, and I knew it would get Chen killed. I confronted him after, asked him why. He said some missions are more valuable than the men who run them. Said Chen had seen something in the compound, something that wasn't supposed to be seen, someone who wasn't supposed to be there, and that someone paid Carson to make sure Chen never made it home to talk about it. I don't know who paid him, don't know what Chen saw, but I know David Chen died because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and saw the wrong thing. And I know Carson has been living free for 20 years, while a good man's daughter grows up without a father. I'm dying now. Cancer. Maybe 6 months left. I thought about going to the authorities, but who would believe a washed-up drunk with a psych discharge? So instead, I'm leaving this letter, hiding it where someone might find it, hoping that someday, somehow, the truth comes out and David Chen's family knows he didn't die for nothing. If you find this, Colonel, make it right. Make Carson answer for what he did. And tell Chen's daughter that her father was a hero who died because he couldn't look away when he should have. Marcus Williams, Lieutenant, U.S. Army Kosovo, 2002. Reeves read the letter twice, hands shaking, vision blurring with something that might have been tears or rage or the accumulated burden of 22 years of guilt and grief. Chen saw something in the compound we were targeting, someone who wasn't supposed to be there, and Carson was paid to eliminate the witness. But who was in that compound? Who could be valuable enough to kill an American soldier over? That's what we need to find out. And we have 4 days to do it before Carson tries to kill Sarah and bury the last loose end. They photographed the documents, every page, every alteration. The letter from Williams, all of it documented and backed up to multiple locations. Then they returned the files to their proper places and slipped out of the archives the same way they had entered. Invisible, silent. 2 ghosts moving through an institution that had trained them to move exactly this way. By 0400, they were back in Doc's quarters, uploading the photos to encrypted cloud storage and secure email accounts. Insurance. If something happened to them, the truth would still exist, would still be findable. We have proof now, Doc observed. We could take this to the Inspector General, to military police. Skip over Carson and go straight to the people who can arrest him. Reeves shook his head. And what happens to Sarah while they investigate? While Carson lawyers up and the system grinds through months of bureaucracy? She's still in his reach, still vulnerable. And if he suspects we're building a case, he accelerates his timeline, makes his move before we can stop him. So what do? We finish the week. We keep Sarah safe. We watch Carson every second. And when he makes his move during the live fire exercise, we're ready. We catch him in the act, red-handed. No way to deny, no way to escape. Doc looked at him with something that might have been admiration or concern or both. You're setting Sarah up as bait. I'm using the situation Carson has already created. The live fire exercise was always planned. We're just making sure it doesn't end the way he intends. And if something goes wrong, if he shoots before we can stop him, then I step in front of the bullet. same as I should have done for her father 22 years ago. The conversation ended there, but both men understood what had been decided. The next 4 days would determine whether David Chen's death was finally answered or whether his daughter joined him in a grave dug by the same betrayal that had claimed him. Week 5 arrived with unseasonable warmth, Indian summer stretching into late October, the kind of weather that felt like a gift but carried an edge of wrongness. The live fire exercise was scheduled for Thursday, 2 days away. Advanced long-range shooting with multiple students firing simultaneously at separate targets across a 1,000-meter range. Dangerous under the best circumstances. Potentially lethal if someone wanted to make murder look like accident. Reeves spent those 2 days reviewing every detail of the exercise, checking sight lines, calculating ballistics, determining where Carson would need to position himself to take a shot at Sarah and make it appear like crossfire or ricochet. There were 3 viable positions. Reeves marked them all, assigned Doc Tillman to observe 2 of them, took the third himself. On Wednesday evening, Sarah Chen came to his office. No appointment, no warning, just knocked and entered when told and stood before his desk with the same directness she brought to everything. Something's wrong. You've been watching me differently the last few days. And Major Carson has been too nice, too helpful, like he's waiting for something. Reeves could have denied it. Could have told her to focus on training and trust that the instructors had everything under control. Could have protected her from knowledge that would only add stress to an already demanding course. But she was David Chen's daughter, and David Chen had deserved better than comfortable lies. So Reeves told her everything about Kosovo and the cassette tape and Williams's letter, about Carson's betrayal and the anonymous phone call warning of an attack, about the plan to catch Carson during the live fire exercise, all of it. The whole truth that he had been carrying alone for weeks. Sarah listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat in silence for a long time, processing, calculating, running scenarios the way her intelligence training had taught her. You're using me as bait. Yes. To catch the man who killed my father. Yes. And if it goes wrong, then Doc and I will stop it, whatever it takes. Sarah stood, walked to the window, looked out at the ranges where she had spent the last 5 weeks learning to be what her father had been, a shepherd, a protector, someone who stood between wolves and flock even when the cost was everything. I want to help. You are helping by being ready, by trusting us, by staying alive. She turned from the window, met his eyes. My father died not knowing who betrayed him, died thinking it was just war and bad luck. I won't make the same mistake. If Carson comes for me tomorrow, I want to see his face. Want him to know that I know what he did. Want him to understand that David Chen's daughter is not going to die quiet. Reeves saw steel in her then, the kind that could not be taught or trained, the kind that came from genetics and grief and a lifetime of questions finally finding answers. Your father would be proud of you. Sarah's expression hardened with resolve. Then let's make sure I live long enough to make him prouder. Thursday morning broke clear and cold. The warmth of the previous days had fled overnight, replaced by wind that cut through clothing and made long-range shooting a test of mathematics and willpower. Perfect conditions for an advanced exercise. Terrible conditions for staying warm in a prone position for hours. 16 students assembled at the 1,000-meter range. Each would shoot 10 rounds at individual targets while instructors observed and scored. Wind was gusting 12 to 15 miles per hour. Variable, unpredictable, the kind that separated expert shooters from merely good ones. Phil Carson ran the safety briefing. Professional, thorough. No hint that today was anything other than routine training. He assigned firing positions, set time limits, explained safety protocols with the calm authority of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Sarah drew position 7, middle of the line, exposed on both flanks. Exactly where Carson would want her if he planned to make a shot look like accidental crossfire. Reeves positioned himself on a ridge 300 meters east with a spotting scope and his personal rifle. Doc Tillman took the western position with binoculars and a radio. Between them, they had overlapping fields of observation that covered every angle Carson might use. The exercise began at 0900 hours. Students settled into firing positions, loaded magazines, began the slow process of reading wind and adjusting scopes and finding that space between heartbeats where accuracy lived. Carson moved between positions, offering corrections and advice, playing the role of instructor with perfect fidelity. He approached Sarah's position, knelt beside her, examined her setup, suggested a minor adjustment to her scope. Reeves watched through his spotting scope, heart hammering, finger resting near the trigger of his rifle, waiting for Carson to make a move, to pull a weapon, to reveal himself. But Carson simply stood and moved to the next student. 15 minutes passed. Students began firing. The range filled with the irregular percussion of rifles discharging, bullets flying downrange through cold air, steel targets ringing when rounds found their marks. Sarah fired her first shot, perfect center mass on her target, loaded and fired again, another hit. She was halfway through her string when Reeves saw it. Movement on the ridgeline 400 meters north. A position that should have been clear. A glint of glass catching sunlight. Someone else was on the range. Someone with a scope. Someone aiming toward the firing line. Reeves swung his rifle toward the movement. Found the target in his own scope. It was not Carson. It was Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Hartwick, the woman who had been pushing to modernize the sniper program, who had argued for replacing Reeves with data-driven methods, who had access to all the training schedules and safety protocols, who, as deputy commander, had legitimate authority to draw weapons from the armory for inspection and evaluation purposes, who could sign out a rifle for what she would claim was routine assessment of student equipment without raising any suspicion whatsoever. She was setting up that rifle now, aiming not at a downrange target, but at the firing line itself. At position 7, at Sarah Chen, Reeves's mind raced through calculations. Distance, wind, time to acquire target, time to fire, time to stop what was about to happen. He keyed his radio to Doc's frequency. North Ridge, 400 meters. Hartwick is the shooter. Before Doc could respond, Reeves made a decision that would define everything that followed. He shifted his aim from Hartwick to Carson, who stood 20 meters behind the firing line, watching the students shoot, his back to Reeves's position. Because Reeves suddenly understood. Carson was not the shooter. He was the scapegoat. Hartwick was the one who had been in Kosovo, not as a shooter, but as intelligence liaison, the person in the compound that David Chen had seen, the person whose presence there had been classified above even the operator's clearance, the person who had paid Carson to call in those coordinates and eliminate the witness who could expose her unauthorized presence in a black site operation. And now she was going to kill Sarah Chen and frame Carson for it, eliminate both loose ends with one shot, make it look like Carson had finally snapped under his guilt and committed murder-suicide before the truth could surface. Reeves had been hunting the wrong predator. He keyed the radio again, voice urgent. "Doc, get to Sarah, get her off the line, now." Already moving, Doc's voice came back. But Reeves knew Doc could not reach Sarah in time. The distance was too great. His age and illness would slow him down. By the time he arrived, Hartwick would have fired, which left one option. Reeves acquired Hartwick in his scope. She was settling into her firing position, eye to scope, finger moving toward trigger, breathing slowing, all the hallmarks of someone about to take a shot. Range to target, 412 meters. Wind, gusting 13 miles per hour, quartering left to right. Elevation, 200-foot difference. Time to decision, 3 seconds. Reeves had spent 30 years making shots like this, had killed men at twice this distance in worse conditions. His body knew the mathematics without conscious thought, knew how much to lead, how much to elevate, knew the exact moment when wind and heartbeat and bullet trajectory aligned into certainty. But this was different. This was not some enemy combatant in a distant war. This was an American officer, a fellow soldier, someone who had sworn the same oaths and worn the same uniform. Shooting her would end his career, would lead to courts-martial in prison and the destruction of everything he had built. But letting her shoot would end Sarah Chen's life. The mathematics were simple. Reeves exhaled half a breath, found that space between seconds where the whole world stops, let muscle memory and 30 years of training take over, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the valley like judgment. 400 meters away, Lieutenant Colonel Rachel Hartwick jerked backward as the bullet struck her rifle's scope, shattering the optic and driving glass fragments into her face. She screamed and fell, hands clutching her bloodied features, her weapon tumbling down the ridge. The range erupted into chaos. Students ceased fire. Instructors shouted commands. Doc Tillman reached Sarah's position and pulled her to cover behind a concrete barrier. Carson spun toward Reeves' position, eyes wide with shock and something else. Recognition, understanding, the realization that his careful plan had just collapsed. Reeves stood from his hide site, shouldered his rifle, began walking down the ridge toward the range, toward Carson, toward the reckoning that had been 22 years in coming. Behind him, military police vehicles were already racing toward Hartwick's position, summoned by the gunshot and chaos. Ahead, Carson stood frozen, watching Reeves approach, knowing that everything was about to unravel. When Reeves reached the firing line, he found Sarah Chen standing with Doc Tillman, unharmed, eyes wide but steady. She looked at Reeves and understood immediately what he had done, what he had sacrificed, what it had cost. "Thank you." Reeves nodded once, then turned to face Carson. The two men stood 10 feet apart, old friends, old comrades, old betrayers and betrayed. "It was Hartwick," Carson said. "All of it. She was in Kosovo running an off-books operation. Chen saw her when he shouldn't have. She paid me to eliminate the witness, threatened to destroy my career if I didn't. I was young and scared, and I made a choice I've regretted every day since. Regret doesn't bring back the dead. I know." Carson's voice broke. "God help me, I know. I've carried David's death for 22 years, knew it would catch up eventually. Thought maybe I deserved it when it did." "You do deserve it," Sarah stated, stepping forward. "You killed my father for money, let his daughter grow up without him. And you would have let Hartwick kill me too if Colonel Reeves hadn't stopped her." Carson looked at her with eyes that held genuine remorse and something deeper, something broken beyond repair. "I didn't know she was going to kill you. Didn't know any of this until it was already in motion. She told me to trust her, told me she would handle everything. I should have known better, should have stopped her, should have confessed 22 years ago." The military police arrived then, took Carson into custody, took Hartwick away in an ambulance, her face shredded by glass, her career and freedom both ended, took statements from everyone present. By evening, the truth had spread through Fort Benning like wildfire. The Kosovo conspiracy, the betrayal, the cover-up, Reeves's shot that had saved Sarah Chen and exposed everything. He sat in his office that night, waiting for the inevitable summons. The investigation, the charges, the court-martial for shooting a superior officer, even if that officer was attempting murder. Doc Tillman sat with him, hands trembling, exhaustion written in every line of his weathered face. "You did the right thing. Doesn't mean it won't cost everything. Some things are worth the cost." A knock on the door interrupted them. Sarah Chen entered without waiting for permission. She carried a folder, set it on Reeves's desk. "William's letter, the cassette tape, the altered files. I submitted all of it to the Inspector General with a full statement about what happened today. About Hartwick's attempted murder. About Carson's confession. About your shot that saved my life." Reeves opened the folder. Inside was a preliminary determination from the IG's office. Shooting ruled justified in defense of another. No charges to be filed. Commendation recommended for actions preventing loss of life. He stared at the words, not quite believing them. "How?" Sarah's expression softened. "Turns out the anonymous caller who warned you about the attack? That was William's widow. She had copies of everything her husband left behind. When she saw my name on the SOTIC roster, she knew it was time to act. She's been feeding information to the IG for weeks, building a case. Your shot just accelerated the timeline." "So we're clear, no charges?" Sarah nodded. "You're not just clear. You're heroes, both of you. The men who finally brought justice for Kosovo." Reeves looked at this woman who carried her father's determination and his absolute commitment to doing what was right. This woman who had survived an assassination attempt and emerged stronger. This woman who would graduate SOTIC in 4 weeks and go on to serve with the same honor that David Chen had embodied. "Your father would be so proud of you." Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears she did not let fall. "And he would be grateful to you for protecting me, for finding the truth, for carrying his memory all these years." She saluted, sharp and clean and full of respect. Reeves returned the salute. And then she was gone, leaving 2 old warriors sitting in the quiet of an office that had seen 30 years of students and secrets and the slow accumulation of debts finally paid. Doc broke the silence. "What now?" Reeves looked out the window at the ranges where tomorrow another class would shoot, and another generation would learn to be shepherds in a world that needed them. "Now we finish the course. We graduate Sarah Chen and every other student who earned it. We testify at Carson and Hartwick's trials. We make sure the truth about Kosovo gets told in full. And then," he paused, smiled faintly, "then I retire. 6 months early, before the Army decides they want to make an example anyway." Go out on my own terms. With the debt to David Chen finally settled, Doc nodded slowly, his trembling hands folded in his lap. The Parkinson's stealing more each day, but not yet stealing everything. I'll be right behind you. Figure we've earned some peace, some quiet, some years where we don't carry the burden of other men's wars. Peace sounds good, Reeves agreed. But both men knew the truth. Old soldiers never found peace. They just found different battles, different ways to serve, different debts to pay. The burden never truly lifted. It just became familiar enough to carry without breaking. The investigation consumed Fort Benning like wildfire through dry timber. Within 48 hours, military police had sealed off entire sections of the base. Criminal Investigation Command agents arrived from Washington in unmarked sedans, their credentials heavy with authority that superseded local command. The Inspector General's office deployed a full team. Every document related to Kosovo 2002 was pulled from archives. Every person who had served in that theater was interviewed. Every communication log was analyzed for gaps and alterations. Colonel James Reeves sat through 16 hours of depositions over 3 days. They asked him the same questions in different configurations, looking for contradictions, testing his memory against documented evidence, building a timeline that would either exonerate or condemn everyone involved. He answered every question with the flat precision of someone who had spent 30 years learning to compartmentalize emotion and deliver facts. But at night, alone in his quarters, the walls came down, and the weight of 22 years pressed against his chest like a physical thing. Doc Tillman appeared on the third night, uninvited but expected, carrying a bottle of whiskey that was better than anything they usually drank. They sat in silence for a time, the bottle between them, the darkness outside complete, except for distant lights from the military police checkpoint at the base entrance. "They're going to court Marshal Carson," Doc said eventually. "Accessory to murder, obstruction of justice, conspiracy. 25 to life if convicted." Reeves poured 2 fingers of whiskey into paper cups. "Good. Hartwick's already talking, trying to cut a deal. Says she was running an authorized operation. That Chen's death was unfortunate but necessary for national security. That she had approval from people whose names are classified above our pay grade." "Do you believe her?" Doc shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I believe. Matters what a court-martial believes. And if she's got powerful people protecting her, she might walk with nothing more than a dishonorable discharge and loss of pension." The thought made Reeves's jaw tighten. The idea that Hartwick could be responsible for David Chen's death, could attempt to murder his daughter 22 years later, and escape with anything less than life imprisonment felt like a violation of every principle that had kept him in uniform for 3 decades. "Then we make sure the court-martial hears everything," Reeves said quietly. "Every detail, every piece of evidence. We put Sarah on the stand to testify about the attempt on her life. We make it impossible for them to sweep this under classified protocols and political protection." Doc sipped his whiskey. "You know that means Sarah relives the worst day of her life in front of a room full of strangers. Means she becomes the face of this case. Every news outlet will want her story. Every conspiracy theorist will have opinions. She'll never have privacy again." "She's David Chen's daughter," Reeves said. "She's stronger than any of them know, and she deserves to see justice done for her father, even if it costs her peace." They finished the bottle in silence. Outside, somewhere across the base, young soldiers were running night exercises, learning to move in darkness, learning to trust each other when visibility failed, learning the lessons that Reeves had been teaching for most of his adult life. In 4 weeks, SOTIC Class 347 would graduate. Sarah Chen would be among them if she chose to continue. But Reeves knew the real test was not whether she could shoot straight or move silent. The real test was whether she could carry the weight of what she now knew and still choose to serve. The next morning brought unexpected news. Phil Carson had hanged himself in his cell. The military police found him at 0600 during routine checks. He had used torn bedsheets fashioned into a rope and a ceiling pipe that should not have been accessible. No note, no final confession. Just the empty body of a man who had carried guilt for 22 years and finally found the only exit he could stomach. Reeves received the news in his office while reviewing training schedules. The young lieutenant who delivered the information stood at rigid attention, clearly uncomfortable with being the messenger of death. "Was there anything else?" the lieutenant asked. "Any message he left?" No, sir, just this. The lieutenant placed a small envelope on Reeves's desk. Standard military issue. Reeves's name written in Carson's familiar handwriting across the front. After the lieutenant departed, Reeves sat staring at the envelope for a long time. Part of him wanted to burn it unopened, to deny Carson even this final communication. But another part, the part that had been David Chen's friend and teammate, needed to know what final words the dead man had chosen. He opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a set of dog tags. David Chen's dog tags, the ones that should have been returned to his family 22 years ago, but had somehow ended up in Carson's possession all this time. The letter was brief. Jim, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Coward's way out, I know. But I've been a coward since Kosovo, and at least this way, I'm consistent. I took Chen's tags the night he died. Told myself I'd return them to his family personally, make some kind of amends. But I never did. Kept them as a reminder. As penance. Every day for 22 years I carried them, and remembered what I'd done. Hartwick will tell the court she was authorized. She'll name names of people you can't touch and hide behind classifications you can't penetrate. She'll probably walk. That's how this works when you serve the right masters. But you need to know the truth, even if the court never hears it. Chen saw Hartwick meeting with a foreign asset in that Kosovo compound. Someone she was running off books. Someone whose intelligence was valuable enough that her entire career was built on the information he provided. When Chen spotted her through his scope, she knew he'd recognize her face, knew he'd report it, knew questions would be asked that she couldn't answer. So she paid me $50,000 to call in our coordinates to local militia. Told me it would just scatter the team, create confusion, maybe some injuries. She promised Chen wouldn't be killed, just separated long enough for her to complete the meeting and extract her asset. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Because $50,000 was more money than I'd ever seen, and my daughter needed surgery, and the army insurance wasn't covering it all. I told myself I was saving my child's life by risking yours. But Chen died, and my daughter died anyway 6 months later. Congenital heart defect. All that money, all that guilt, and she still died. I've been in hell ever since. Watching you carry guilt that was mine. Watching Chen's daughter grow up through photos her mother posted online. Watching the years pass and the weight accumulate until some mornings I couldn't get out of bed. I deserve worse than hanging, but it's all I have left to give. Tell Sarah Chen her father was a better man than I could ever be. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her the world is poorer for his absence and richer for her existence. And Jim, forgive yourself. You made the right call in Kosovo. Chen believed that when he died. I believe it now. The only person who made the wrong call was me. Phil. Reeves read the letter 3 times. Then he placed it carefully in his desk drawer along with Chen's dog tags. Evidence for the court-martial. Testimony from beyond the grave. The final piece of a puzzle that had taken 2 decades to assemble. He sat in the quiet of his office and felt something shift inside him. Some long-carried burden finally beginning to ease. Carson's confession did not erase the guilt, did not bring David Chen back to life, but it confirmed what Reeves had needed to hear for 22 years. The call in Kosovo had been right. The mission had been just. David Chen had died because of betrayal, not because of Reeves's leadership. The weight did not disappear, but it became easier to carry. That afternoon, Reeves drove to the base chapel. He had not been inside in years, had lost whatever faith he once possessed, somewhere between too many funerals and too many flag-draped coffins. But today he needed the quiet, needed the space where men had prayed for courage before battles and forgiveness after them. He found Sarah Chen sitting in the front pew. She did not turn when he entered, simply stared at the altar with the same 1,000-yard focus she brought to looking through scopes. Reeves sat beside her. Neither spoke for a time. "Carson killed himself," Sarah said finally. "I heard." "Yes. Part of me is glad. Part of me wanted him to suffer more. To spend decades in prison thinking about what he took from me. Does that make me a bad person?" Reeves considered the question. "It makes you human. Grief and rage are natural. The fact that you're questioning them means you're not consumed by them." Sarah pulled something from her pocket. The photograph, the only one she had of her father holding her as an infant. Laminated and worn from years of handling. "I used to look at this and wonder what he was thinking," she said. "Whether he loved me, whether he regretted leaving, whether he knew he'd never come back. And now I know he loved me enough to die protecting principles he believed in, loved me enough to carry my picture into combat, loved me enough that bad people had to kill him to keep their secrets safe. She turned to Reeves, eyes dry but carrying weight that would never fully lift. Colonel Carson's letter, the one he left for you. What did it say? Reeves pulled the letter from his jacket, handed it to her without comment, watched her face as she read, saw emotions cascade across her features. Anger, sorrow, understanding, acceptance. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and returned it. He saved his daughter's life with blood money, she said. And she died anyway. There's something almost biblical about that, the punishment fitting the crime. Your father would have forgiven him, Reeves said. Eventually, David was like that, believed in redemption even for people who didn't deserve it. Sarah smiled faintly. Then my father was a better person than I am. Because I don't think I can forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That's okay too. Forgiveness isn't required. Justice is. They sat in the chapel quiet, surrounded by the prayers of generations who had worn the uniform and carried the weight and tried to make sense of a world that rarely made sense. Finally, Sarah spoke again. Will you be there at the court-martial when I testify? Every day, Reeves promised. Front row, whatever you need. She nodded, stood, placed a hand on his shoulder. Thank you for protecting me, for finding the truth, for carrying my father's memory when no one else would. He was my brother, Reeves said simply. You are his legacy. Protecting you was the least I could do. After she left, Reeves remained in the chapel. He took out David Chen's dog tags, let them rest in his palm. The metal was cold and worn smooth from Carson's 22 years of carrying them. I got her through it, brother, Reeves whispered to the empty air. Your daughter is alive and strong and everything you hoped she'd be. The people who killed you are facing justice. The truth is finally out. You can rest now. The chapel offered no response, but Reeves felt something nonetheless. Some small measure of peace, some quiet settling of accounts long overdue. He stood and walked back into the Georgia sunlight, dog tags in his pocket, the weight a little lighter than it had been that morning. The court-martial convened 3 weeks later in a sealed courtroom at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Media was barred, spectators limited to essential personnel and family members. The proceedings were classified at multiple levels, with entire sections of testimony conducted in closed session, where even the court recorder was required to have top-secret clearance. Reeves attended every day, sitting in the front row in his dress uniform, 3 rows of ribbons on his chest, telling the story of 30 years in service. Doc Tillman sat beside him, hands folded in his lap to hide the tremor, his own uniform pressed and perfect, despite the illness stealing his steadiness day by day. Sarah Chen testified on the 4th day. She wore her dress uniform, hair pulled back regulation tight, no makeup, no jewelry except her father's dog tags, which she had been given after Carson's death. She stood at the witness stand with her right hand raised and swore to tell the truth with a voice that did not waver. For 2 hours, she recounted her experience in SOTIC Class 347. The training, the close call during the stalking exercise when a bullet had ricocheted near her head, the final live fire exercise when Lieutenant Colonel Hartwick had positioned herself on the ridge with intent to kill. The defense attorney, a sharp-edged major with a reputation for dismantling prosecution cases, approached her with the careful confidence of someone who had found a weak point to exploit. Sergeant Chen, you claim Colonel Hartwick attempted to murder you. But isn't it possible she was simply conducting a safety observation from an alternate position? No, sir, Sarah replied. Safety observers do not aim rifles at student firing positions. They observe with binoculars or spotting scopes. But you admit you didn't actually see Colonel Hartwick aim at you? I was focused on my own shooting, sir. But Colonel Reeves observed her through his scope from 300 meters. He saw her settling into a firing position with her rifle aimed at my location. That's why he took the shot that stopped her. The defense attorney consulted his notes. Colonel Reeves is a close friend of your deceased father. Isn't it possible his judgment was clouded by a desire to protect you? That he saw threat where none existed? Sarah's eyes hardened, the steel that Reeves had recognized weeks ago coming to full strength. Sir, Colonel Reeves is one of the finest marksmen this army has ever produced. He has made life and death decisions under fire in multiple combat zones. His judgment has saved countless lives over 3 decades. To suggest he would shoot a superior officer based on clouded thinking is not just wrong. It's insulting to every soldier he's ever trained and every mission he's ever completed. The courtroom went absolutely silent. The defense attorney tried a different angle. Sergeant Chen, you're asking this court to believe that a decorated officer with 20 years of service suddenly decided to commit murder in broad daylight surrounded by witnesses. Does that seem reasonable to you? What seems reasonable to me, sir, is that people who commit crimes eventually get caught. Colonel Hartwick spent 22 years covering up her involvement in my father's death. When I enrolled in SOTIC and started asking questions about Kosovo, she saw me as a threat to her secrets. She attempted to eliminate that threat. Colonel Reeves stopped her. Those are the facts. The defense attorney dismissed her with visible frustration. As Sarah stepped down from the witness stand, she caught Reeves' eye. He gave her the slightest nod. Pride and respect and something deeper. The recognition of one warrior acknowledging another. The prosecution called Reeves next. He took the stand with the same calm he had brought to 1,000 other impossible situations. Stated his name and rank and service history, then methodically walked through every detail of the investigation. The cassette tape, William's letter, the altered files, the anonymous warning, the setup of observation positions during the live fire exercise. When he reached the moment of shooting Hartwick, he paused, chose his words with care. I observed Lieutenant Colonel Hartwick on the North Ridge in a prone firing position with her rifle aimed toward the student firing line, specifically toward position 7, where Sergeant Chen was located. I calculated range, wind, and time to target acquisition. I determined she was seconds away from firing. I made the decision to interdict her shot by destroying her optic. At that range and in those conditions, it was the only way to prevent loss of life. The lead prosecutor, a colonel with gray temples and shrewd eyes, asked the question everyone needed answered. Colonel Reeves, in your professional opinion, was Lieutenant Colonel Hartwick attempting to murder Sergeant Chen? Yes, sir, without question. On what do you base that assessment? Reeves looked directly at the panel of officers serving as jury. On 30 years of reading tactical situations and understanding human behavior. On the fact that Hartwick had no legitimate reason to be on that ridge with a weapon. On the fact that her aim point was not downrange at targets, but at a student firing position. On the fact that when I destroyed her scope, she did not call for a ceasefire or report a safety violation. She fell back and attempted to flee. Those are not the actions of an innocent officer conducting routine observation. Those are the actions of someone caught in the act of attempted murder. The defense tried to shake him on cross-examination, questioned his timeline, suggested he had acted rashly, implied his friendship with David Chen had compromised his objectivity. Reeves answered every question with the same steady precision. Never raised his voice, never showed anger. Simply presented facts and let them speak. When he was finally dismissed, he returned to his seat beside Doc Tillman. Doc leaned close and whispered, "You did good, Jimmy. Real good." The trial continued for 2 more weeks. Expert witnesses testified about ballistics and shooting positions. Intelligence analysts explained the classified operation Hartwick had been running in Kosovo. Character witnesses spoke to Carson's state of mind and years of concealed guilt. William's widow took the stand and confirmed she had been the anonymous caller. Explained that her husband had left her detailed instructions before his death. Told her to wait until the time was right. When she saw Sarah Chen's name on the SOTIC roster, she knew the moment had arrived. Finally, Rachel Hartwick herself testified. She appeared in dress uniform despite being held in pre-trial confinement. Her face bore scars from the glass fragments that had shredded her features when Reeves's bullet destroyed her scope. She would carry those marks for the rest of her life, physical proof of the moment her secrets had finally caught up to her. She denied everything, claimed her Kosovo operation had been authorized at the highest levels, said David Chen's death had been an unfortunate consequence of war, not murder, insisted her presence on the range during the live fire exercise had been routine safety observation that Reeves had misinterpreted. But her story had holes. The prosecution exploited them methodically, showed how her operation had never been properly logged, how the asset she claimed to be running had no records in any intelligence database, how Carson's confession letter directly contradicted her version of events. Most damning was the forensic analysis of her rifle. It showed she had been aiming not at downrange targets, but at the student firing line. The angle was wrong for observation, perfect for murder. The panel deliberated for 6 hours. They returned with a verdict that felt like justice finally delivered after 22 years of waiting. Guilty on all charges: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, conduct unbecoming an officer. Sentence: life imprisonment at the United States Disciplinary Barracks with no possibility of parole. Reeves sat in the courtroom and felt decades of weight finally begin to lift. Not completely, never completely, but enough that breathing became easier. Enough that sleep might come without the ghosts. Sarah Chen sat 3 rows behind him. When the verdict was read, she closed her eyes and whispered something that might have been a prayer or might have been a promise to a father she had never known. After the sentencing, Reeves found her in the hallway outside the courtroom. She stood alone, still in uniform, staring at nothing. "It's done," Reeves said quietly. She nodded, wiped at eyes that were dry but wanted to cry. "I thought I'd feel different. Thought justice would make the pain less. But he's still gone. She's in prison, but my father is still dead, and I still grew up without him." "Justice doesn't heal wounds," Reeves said. "It just prevents them from getting infected. The pain will always be there. But now you can carry it without wondering if the people responsible are walking free." Sarah turned to him. In the fluorescent hallway lighting, she looked young and old at the same time. Young enough to have her whole life ahead, old enough to know how much could be taken away. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you finish SOTIC, graduate, become the sniper your father would be proud of, serve with honor, build a life he would have wanted for you. And sometimes when the weight gets too heavy, you remember that good people fought to give you justice, that you're not alone in carrying what he left behind." "Will you be there at graduation?" Reeves smiled. "Front row, same as always." She hugged him then, quick and fierce and full of gratitude that had no adequate words. Then she pulled back and saluted with perfect precision. He returned the salute, and then she was gone, walking down the hallway toward whatever future awaited her, carrying her father's dog tags and his legacy and the knowledge that justice, however delayed, had finally been served. Reeves stood in the empty hallway with Doc Tillman at his side. "It's over," Doc said. "No," Reeves replied. "It's just beginning. For her, for us, for everyone who carries the weight of what we do and tries to make it mean something." Doc nodded slowly, his hands trembling, his time running short. "But we did good, Jimmy. We protected the flock, just like shepherds are supposed to." Reeves looked at his oldest friend, this man who had stood beside him through wars and grief, and the long hunt for truth. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we did good." They walked out of the courthouse together into Kansas sunlight that felt warmer than it had any right to feel in November. Behind them, justice had been served. Ahead, whatever remained of their lives waited to be lived. The weight was still there, would always be there. But it was a weight worth carrying, the weight of service and sacrifice. And standing between the wolves and the flock, even when the cost was everything. And sometimes, on the good days, that was enough. Winter came early to Georgia that year. The first snow in Fort Benning since 1989 fell on the morning of SOTIC graduation, turning the parade ground into something clean and white and unmarked by the boots of men who had trained there for 70 years. Colonel James Reeves stood at the edge of that pristine field, watching flakes spiral down through gray sky, thinking about endings and beginnings and the strange mathematics of time that made both feel like the same thing. In 3 hours, 16 students would march across that field to receive certificates that marked them as qualified special operations snipers, shepherds, as Reeves had taught them to think of themselves, protectors who killed not because they wanted to, but because the flock needed defending. And someone had to stand between the wolves and the innocent. Sarah Chen would be among them, top of her class, highest scores in stalking, fieldcraft, and long-range precision. Not the strongest shooter, not the fastest, but the most consistent, the most disciplined, the one who understood that being a sniper was not about the individual, but about the mission and the people depending on accuracy, when accuracy was all that stood between life and death. David Chen's daughter had become everything her father had been, and more besides. Reeves felt pride and grief in equal measure, pride that she had succeeded, grief that David had not lived to see it. Footsteps crunched through fresh snow behind him. Doc Tillman appeared at his side, moving carefully, his balance not what it once was. The Parkinson's advancing with the cruel inevitability of all degenerative diseases. He carried 2 cups of coffee that trembled in his hands but did not spill. "Last one," Doc said, handing a cup to Reeves. "Last graduation you'll ever run. How's it feel?" "Like watching your children leave home," Reeves said, pride and loss all tangled together. Doc sipped his coffee, steam rising into the cold air. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 old warriors who had said everything that needed saying years ago, and now communicated more through presence than words. "You know what happens after today?" Doc asked finally. "We retire, collect our pensions, find some quiet place where the weight doesn't feel so heavy." Doc smiled faintly. "You really believe that? That we'll find peace?" "No," Reeves admitted. "But we'll find something. Purpose, maybe. Different battles, different ways to serve." "And Sarah?" "Sarah becomes what she was always meant to be. A shepherd, a protector, someone who carries on her father's legacy and makes it mean something." Doc nodded slowly. His hands shook worse than yesterday, worse than last week. The disease was accelerating. Soon he would not be able to hold a cup. Soon after that, not much else. But today he was still here, still standing, still serving in the small ways that remained available to him. "I'm proud of her," Doc said. "Proud of you too, for protecting her, for finding the truth, for carrying David's memory all these years." "We both carried it," Reeves said. "You as much as me." "Yeah," Doc agreed. "But you carried it heavier, blamed yourself more. I'm glad you can finally set some of that down." Reeves looked at the snow-covered field, pristine and unmarked, waiting for boots to cross it and leave their prints. Proof that someone had been there, that something had happened, that the passage of time left evidence in its wake. "I'm not setting it down," he said quietly. "I'm passing it forward. To Sarah. To every student who graduates today. The weight doesn't disappear. It just gets shared among more shoulders until no one person has to carry it alone." "That's what shepherds do," Doc said. "Share the burden, protect the flock together." They finished their coffee as the snow continued to fall. The graduation ceremony began at 1100 hours. Family members filled the bleachers despite the cold. Proud parents and spouses and children who did not yet understand what it meant that their loved ones had earned the right to be called snipers. They cheered and took photographs and waved small flags, celebrating accomplishment without fully grasping the weight that came with it. Reeves stood on the platform in his dress uniform, ribbons and medals catching the pale winter light. Beside him, the new commander of the sniper school, a colonel who had never deployed to Kosovo and knew nothing about the ghosts that haunted these ranges. The transition of power had been quiet and professional. Reeves had submitted his retirement paperwork the day after Hartwick's conviction. The Army had accepted it without ceremony. 34 years of service ending not with fanfare, but with signature on documents, and the slow release of obligations that had defined his entire adult life. The 16 graduates marched onto the field in perfect formation, dress uniforms crisp, movements synchronized, the product of 9 weeks that had broken them down and rebuilt them into something harder and more focused than they had been before. Sarah Chen marched in the front rank, eyes forward, posture perfect. If the weight of what she carried affected her bearing, it did not show. She had learned the first lesson of being a shepherd, that the flock should never see you struggle, should never doubt that you could protect them, should never know how close you came to breaking under the burden of what you did on their behalf. The new commander read the citation, spoke about excellence and dedication, and the proud tradition of American snipers dating back to the Revolution. It was all true and all meaningless compared to the reality of what these soldiers would face when they deployed, when they looked through scopes at human beings and made the decision to end lives for reasons they hoped were just. Then Reeves stepped forward to present the certificates. One by one, the graduates approached, saluted, received the paper that marked their qualification, shook his hand, moved on. When Sarah Chen's name was called, Reeves felt time compress, saw her as the infant in David's photograph, as the young sergeant asking questions about her father in his office months ago, as the warrior she had become through discipline and pain, and the refusal to accept limitations others had tried to impose. She marched to the platform, saluted with precision that would have made her father weep with pride. Reeves returned the salute, handed her the certificate. But before she could step away, he did something he had not done for any other graduate. He removed the small metal pin from his own uniform, the sniper qualification badge he had worn for 30 years, the one David Chen had helped him earn on a range much like this one, in what felt like another lifetime. He pinned it to Sarah's uniform over her heart. "Sergeant Chen," he said quietly, voice carrying just far enough for her to hear. "Your father would be proud. I know I am." Sarah's eyes shimmered, but she did not let the tears fall. Not here, not in front of everyone. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you, sir," and saluted one more time before returning to formation. The ceremony concluded with the traditional firing of volleys, 3 rifle shots echoing across the parade ground, the sound of shepherds announcing their presence to whatever wolves might be listening. When the families descended onto the field to congratulate their graduates, Reeves slipped away, found Doc Tillman waiting by the equipment shed where this whole story had started months ago, where Sarah had cleaned her rifle and asked about her father, and begun the journey that led to this moment. "You gave her your pin," Doc observed. "She earned it, more than most." David would have done the same. Reeves nodded. "That's why I did it. To honor him. To pass something forward that should have been passed years ago if the world had been fair." Doc's hands trembled worse in the cold. He tucked them into his pockets to hide the weakness. "We're done now, Jimmy. Really done." What comes next? Reeves had been thinking about this question for weeks. Had no clear answer except instinct and the pull of something that felt right, even if it made no practical sense. "I'm going to build something," he said. "A place where veterans can come when the weight gets too heavy. Where they can talk to people who understand what it's like to carry what we carry. Where maybe they can find some peace, or at least some company in the burden." Doc smiled. "A shelter for shepherds?" "Something like that. Count me in. Whatever time I have left, I want to spend it doing something that matters." They shook hands. The tremor in Doc's grip pronounced, but the strength still there underneath. 2 old warriors making plans for battles they would fight with words instead of bullets, healing instead of harm, building instead of breaking. Sarah found them as the sun broke through the clouds and turned the snow-covered world into something bright and almost beautiful. She still wore her dress uniform, still carried herself with the bearing of someone who had earned the right to stand tall. But her eyes were softer now, less guarded, as if graduation had given her permission to be something other than a student proving herself worthy. "Colonel Reeves," she said, "Sergeant Major Tillman, I wanted to thank you both for everything." "You did the work?" Reeves said. "We just pointed you in the right direction." "You did more than that. You gave me back my father. Not the man himself, but the truth about who he was and why he died. That's a gift I can never repay." "You repay it by serving well," Doc said, "by being the kind of shepherd your father was. By protecting people who need protecting and carrying the weight so others don't have to." Sarah nodded, then hesitated. Finally asked the question that had probably been building since the day they met. "Will I see you again? After today?" Reeves smiled. "If you want to. I'm not disappearing, just retiring. There's a difference. And if I need advice, or just someone who understands what this life costs, then you call, day or night, whatever you need. That's what shepherds do for each other." Sarah pulled something from her pocket, an envelope. She handed it to Reeves. "Don't open this until you're alone," she said. "It's from my mother. She wanted me to give it to you after graduation." Before Reeves could respond, Sarah hugged him, quick and fierce like before, but lasting just a moment longer, long enough to convey everything that could not be said in words. Gratitude and grief and hope all tangled together. Then she hugged Doc Tillman with the same intensity, and then she was gone, walking across the snow toward her future, leaving prints that would fade when the next storm came, but which existed now as proof that she had been here and survived, and become something her father would recognize. Doc wiped at his eyes with hands that shook. "Damn snow," he muttered. "Gets in your eyes." Reeves smiled. "Yeah, the snow." That evening, alone in his quarters for the last time before he cleared out and left Fort Benning forever, Reeves opened the envelope Sarah had given him. Inside was a letter written in careful handwriting on good paper, the kind of letter someone composed when words mattered and getting them right was more important than speed. "Dear Colonel Reeves, my name is Jennifer Chen. You knew my husband David. You led the team he died serving on in Kosovo 22 years ago. I have spent more than 2 decades being angry at you. Angry that you made the call that put my husband in harm's way. Angry that you survived when he did not. Angry that you got to have a career and a life while David got a grave and a folded flag. That anger kept me going when grief threatened to swallow me whole, gave me something to focus on besides the emptiness. Let me believe that if I could just blame someone enough, the pain would ease. But then Sarah enrolled in your course, started calling me with stories about her training, about you, about the kind of man you were, and the way you taught her to honor her father's memory by becoming the best version of herself. And slowly, over weeks and months, my anger transformed into something else. Understanding, maybe, or at least acceptance. Sarah told me about Kosovo, about the investigation, about how you protected her from the same people who killed her father, about how you spent 22 years carrying guilt that was never yours to carry in the first place. I need you to know that I don't blame you anymore, that I understand you made the best decision you could with the information you had, that David believed in you and trusted you and died thinking the mission was worth the cost. I also need you to know that Sarah loves you, not like a father, because no one can replace David, but like a mentor, like family, like someone who sees her clearly and believes in her completely. You gave me back my daughter when I thought I had lost her to the same military that took my husband. You helped her find purpose and pride and a connection to her father that she desperately needed. For that, I am grateful beyond words. David used to say that shepherds protect the flock even when the flock doesn't know it needs protecting. You protected Sarah, you protected the truth, you protected David's memory. Thank you. I hope you find peace in whatever comes next. You have earned it. With respect and gratitude, Jennifer Chen. Reeves read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in his desk drawer next to David Chen's dog tags and Phil Carson's confession, and all the other documents that told the story of Kosovo and justice delayed but finally delivered. He sat in the quiet of his empty quarters and felt something he had not felt in 22 years. Release, not from the weight. The weight would always be there, but from the guilt, from the crushing certainty that he had failed David Chen and could never make amends. Jennifer Chen's forgiveness did not erase what had happened, did not bring her husband back or give Sarah the childhood she deserved. But it allowed Reeves to finally forgive himself, to accept that he had done his best in an impossible situation, and that his best had been enough even when the outcome was tragedy. He pulled out his journal, the one he had kept through 30 years of service, entries documenting missions and training, and the slow accumulation of lessons learned through blood and sacrifice. He wrote one final entry. Today I graduated my last class, Sarah Chen among them, top student. Her father would be proud beyond measure. I gave her my qualification pin, told her what David would have said if he were here, that she earned it, that she is worthy of the legacy she carries. Jennifer Chen sent a letter, forgiveness. I did not know I needed, but which changes everything. The weight is still there, but it feels different now, shared instead of solitary, honored instead of shameful. Tomorrow I retire, leave Fort Benning for the last time, begin whatever comes next. Doc and I have plans, a place for veterans, a shelter for shepherds, something that gives back to the people who gave everything. I don't know if David can see any of this from wherever the dead go, but if he can, I hope he knows I kept my promise, protected his daughter, found the truth, made sure justice was served even when it took 22 years. I hope he knows I'm sorry it took so long. And I hope he knows that what he started, what he died protecting, continues through Sarah and every other shepherd who learns that killing is sometimes necessary, but should never be easy. The flock is safe tonight because of people like David Chen, like Sarah Chen, like every soldier who puts on the uniform and accepts the weight and stands between the wolves and the innocent. That legacy is worth protecting. That legacy is worth everything. He closed the journal, packed it in a box with his other belongings. Tomorrow he would load everything into his truck and drive away from the only life he had known since he was 22 years old. But tonight, he sat in the quarters that had been his home for 8 years and listened to the sounds of the base settling into darkness. Young soldiers running night exercises, the distant crack of rifle fire from the ranges, the mechanical hum of an institution that would outlive them all. It was the sound of shepherds learning their trade, of warriors preparing for battles they could not yet imagine, of the endless cycle of training and deployment and sacrifice that had defined American military service for 2.5 centuries. Reeves had been part of that cycle for 34 years, had trained hundreds of soldiers, had led missions in 12 countries, had made decisions that saved lives and decisions that ended them, and lived with the weight of both. Now it was time to pass the responsibility to younger shoulders, to trust that what he had taught would endure through the students he had trained and the legacy he had built, one difficult lesson at a time. The next morning, Reeves loaded his truck under skies that had cleared overnight. The snow was already melting, turning the base into mud and slush, the pristine white fading into memory. Doc Tillman helped despite hands that could barely grip. They worked in silence, loading boxes and memories and the accumulated weight of decades into a vehicle that seemed too small to hold it all. When everything was packed, they stood beside the truck and looked back at the ranges one last time. "You think we made a difference?" Doc asked. Reeves thought about Sarah Chen, about Captain Brennan learning humility, about every student who had passed through these gates carrying lessons about wind and distance and the weight of taking human life. "Yeah," he said, "we made a difference. Maybe not as big as we hoped, but enough." "Enough is all any of us get," Doc replied. "The rest is just ego." They shook hands, then hugged with the awkwardness of men who were not accustomed to showing affection, but who understood that some moments required it. "I'll see you next week," Doc said. "We've got a shelter to build." "A shelter for shepherds," Reeves agreed. He climbed into his truck and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, he watched Fort Benning recede, the ranges where he had trained thousands, the barracks where he had lived, the chapel where he had prayed for forgiveness and found something close to peace. He drove through the gates for the last time as a soldier. The guard saluted. He returned it. And then he was on the civilian road heading toward whatever future waited beyond the uniform. 6 months later, in a quiet valley in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, Reeves and Doc Tillman opened the Shepherd's Rest, a residential facility for veterans struggling with the weight of what they had seen and done in service. Not a hospital, not a treatment center, just a place where people who understood could gather and talk and find some measure of peace in shared burden. The funding came from Reeves' retirement savings, Doc's pension, and a substantial anonymous donation that arrived with a note reading simply, "For the shepherds, from someone who understands." Reeves suspected it came from Jennifer Chen, but never asked. Some gifts were best accepted without questioning their source. The first residents arrived on a cold November morning. 7 veterans, different branches, different eras, different wars, but all carrying the same weight, all looking for something that the VA could not provide and their families could not understand. Reeves met them at the door, no longer a colonel, just a man who had worn the uniform and knew what it cost. He welcomed them in, showed them to rooms that overlooked mountains and forests and sky that went on forever. That evening, they gathered in the common room. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, coffee brewed in the kitchen. The trappings of home without the complications of family, who could not comprehend what home meant to people who had seen too much. One by one, the veterans introduced themselves, told their stories, shared the weight they carried. Reeves and Doc listened, did not judge, did not offer solutions, just bore witness to pain that deserved acknowledgement. When everyone had spoken, a young Marine corporal who had lost both legs in Kandahar asked the question they were all thinking. "Does it get easier, carrying it?" Reeves considered his answer carefully. Thought about David Chen in Kosovo and 22 years of grief and guilt. Thought about Sarah Chen and justice finally delivered and forgiveness earned through persistence and protection. "No," he said finally, "it doesn't get easier. The weight doesn't lighten, but you get stronger. And when you're surrounded by people who understand what you carry, you learn that you're not alone in bearing it. That's not the same as easy, but it's better than what you had before." The corporal nodded, seemed satisfied with an answer that did not lie to him about the reality of what the rest of his life would hold. They talked into the night, shared coffee and stories and the tentative beginnings of connection that might eventually become friendship. When exhaustion finally claimed them and they drifted off to their rooms, Reeves sat alone by the dying fire and felt something close to contentment. This was the work he was meant to do. Not training soldiers to kill, though that had been necessary. Not hunting down betrayers, though that too had mattered, but creating space for healing, building shelter for people the world had used and discarded, giving shepherds a place to rest when the weight became too much to carry alone. Doc appeared from the kitchen carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Reeves and settled into the chair beside the fire. "Good first day," Doc said. Reeves sipped the whiskey. "Yeah, good start." "You think David would approve?" Reeves stared into the flames, thought about his friend who had died too young, who had never gotten to see his daughter grow up. Who had believed that protecting the flock was worth any sacrifice? Yeah, Reeves said quietly. I think he'd say we're finally doing what shepherds are supposed to do. Not just protecting the flock, but protecting each other. Doc raised his glass to David Chen and to every shepherd who carries the weight. They drank in silence as the fire burned down to embers and the night deepened around them. 1 year later, Sarah Chen visited the Shepherd's Rest during her leave from deployment. She had spent 8 months in Syria as part of a joint task force targeting high-value assets, had made shots that saved lives and shots that ended them, had carried the weight her father carried and understood now what it had cost him. She arrived unannounced, driving up the mountain road in a rental car, wearing civilian clothes that did not quite hide the bearing of someone who had learned to move through hostile territory. Reeves met her on this porch, older now, gray in his beard, lines around his eyes deeper from squinting at mountains instead of ranges, but still solid, still steady, still the shepherd he had always been. They embraced without words. Then Sarah pulled back and looked at the facility, the main lodge built from reclaimed barnwood, the individual cabins scattered through the trees, the shooting range visible in the distance where residents could practice the skills they had learned in service and might need again. It's beautiful, she said. It's necessary, Reeves replied. That's better than beautiful. She smiled. My father would love it. He would, and he'd be proud of you. I heard about Syria, about the shots you made. Sarah's smile faded, the weight settling onto her shoulders, the way it settled onto everyone who pulled triggers in defense of others. I understand now, she said. Why he chose this life, why he kept deploying even when it meant leaving us. It's not that the work is more important than family. It's that the work protects family, everyone's family, and someone has to do it. Reeves nodded. That's the burden of being a shepherd. Understanding that protection requires sacrifice, and making that sacrifice anyway because the alternative is worse. Does it get easier? Sarah asked. The same question the Marine corporal had asked, the same question every new shepherd asked when the reality of the weight first became clear. Reeves gave her the same answer he gave everyone. No, but you get stronger and you learn that you're not alone. That's what places like this are for. What people like Doc and me are for. When the weight gets too heavy, you come here. You talk to people who understand. You remember that carrying it is worth something. Sarah looked out at the mountains, the November light turning the forest into shades of gold and rust, and the deep green of pines that never changed. Can I stay? She asked. Just for a few days, before I have to go back. Of course, stay as long as you need. That evening, around the fire in the common room, Sarah shared her story with the other residents. Talked about her father and Kosovo and the long hunt for justice. Talked about Sadiq and learning to be a shepherd. Talked about Syria and the shot she had made and the weight she now carried. The other veterans listened, asked questions, shared their own stories in return. The conversation continued late into the night, fueled by coffee and the recognition that comes from meeting people who have walked similar paths through darkness. When everyone had finally drifted to sleep, Sarah and Reeves sat alone by the embers. I'm going to be okay, she said. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, because I have this place, because I have people who understand, because I have you. You have more than that, Reeves said. You have your father's legacy, the knowledge that what you do matters, the certainty that protecting the flock is worth the wait. Is it? Sarah asked. Worth it? Reeves thought about David Chen bleeding out in Kosovo snow, about Jennifer Chen raising a daughter alone, about 22 years of guilt and grief and the long hunt for truth, about Hartwick in prison, and Carson in his grave in justice finally delivered after a generation of waiting. He thought about the 7 veterans sleeping in cabins scattered through these mountains, about the lives saved by shots taken from impossible distances, about the flock protected by shepherds who never asked for recognition and rarely received it. Yeah, he said finally, it's worth it. Not because the math works out, not because the sacrifice equals the saved, but because someone has to stand between the wolves and the innocent, and we chose to be those someones. That choice has meaning, even when the cost is everything. Sarah nodded, seemed to find comfort in words that did not lie about the difficulty, but affirm the purpose. She left 3 days later, hugged Reeves goodbye with the fierce gratitude of someone who had found exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it. Promised to return when her next leave came. Drove back down the mountain toward whatever deployment and danger waited. Reeves watched her go from the porch, watched until the rental car disappeared around the bend and the sound of the engine faded into the whisper of wind through pines. Doc joined him, moving slowly. The Parkinsons claiming more each month, but not yet claiming everything. She'll be all right, Doc said. Yeah, Reeves agreed. She will. David raised a warrior, even if he didn't live to see her become one. That's the thing about legacy, Doc said. It doesn't require presence, just example. David showed her through his absence what it meant to serve. You showed her through your presence what it meant to carry the weight. Between the two of you, she learned what she needed to learn. Reeves thought about this, about fathers and mentors and the ways lessons get passed down through generations, about weight shared and burdens carried and the long tradition of shepherds protecting flocks that never knew their names. We did good, Jimmy, Doc said quietly. All of it. The training, the investigation, the justice, this place. We did what shepherds are supposed to do. Reeves put his arm around his oldest friend, felt the tremor in Doc's shoulders, knew that time was running short for both of them, but that the work would continue through Sarah and every other student they had trained, and every veteran who found shelter in these mountains. Yeah, he said, we did good. They stood on the porch as afternoon light faded to evening and evening to night. Somewhere in the darkness, owls called. Deer moved through the forest. The world continued its ancient rhythm, indifferent to the small dramas of men who tried to make it better. But the trying mattered. The effort counted. The shepherds who stood watch through long nights and carried impossible weights and protected the flock without asking for thanks or expecting recognition. They were the difference between chaos and civilization, between wolf rule and human dignity. Reeves had been a shepherd for 34 years in uniform, and would be one for however many years remained. The work changed, the methods evolved, but the core mission stayed constant. Protect the flock, carry the weight, stand between the wolves and the innocent, pass the legacy forward to those who came after. And when the weight finally became too much, when age or injury or death claimed their ability to serve, trust that someone else would pick up the watch and continue the mission into whatever future awaited. David Chen had done this, had stood watch until death claimed him, had passed his legacy to his daughter, and through her to everyone she would protect. Reeves had done this, had trained hundreds of shepherds, had built a shelter for those who carried impossible weights, had made sure the mission continued beyond his own ability to serve. And Sarah Chen would do this, would protect and serve, and someday train others who would carry the weight after her strength failed. The cycle was eternal, the burden endless, but the meaning undeniable. Some things were worth protecting. Some weights were worth carrying. Some legacies were worth preserving, even when the cost was everything. Reeves looked up at stars emerging in the darkening sky, the same stars David Chen had looked at in his final moments, the same stars that had watched over countless shepherds through countless wars across all of human history. He whispered into the night wind, words meant for a friend who could not hear them, but might somewhere understand. Mission complete, brother. Your daughter is safe. The truth is known. Justice is served. The flock is protected. Rest easy now. We have the watch. The wind carried his words away across mountains that had stood for millennia and would stand for millennia more. Indifferent. Eternal. Witness to the small dramas of men who lived and died and tried to leave the world slightly better than they found it. In the morning, new veterans would arrive. New stories would be shared. New weight would be acknowledged and carried together. The work would continue. The shepherds would stand watch. And somewhere, in whatever place the honored dead resided, David Chen would know that his sacrifice had not been in vain, that his daughter carried his legacy forward, that the flock he died protecting remained safe because people still believed that some things were worth defending, even when the cost was everything, especially when the cost was everything, because that was what shepherds did. And that was enough. Brothers and sisters who served, 22 years is a long time to carry a lie. Colonel Reeves waited because he knew. Real justice doesn't rush, it prepares. I want to ask you something. If you discovered your battle buddy didn't die in combat, but was murdered by someone in your own unit, what would you do? Follow the chain of command, or handle it yourself? Drop your answer below. And if this story reminded you why honor still matters, hit that subscribe button. More stories like this every week. The watch continues.